Good morning and welcome to the second day of the Advisory Commission on Special Education. We are happy that you're joining us and want to extend a hearty welcome to members of the public in the room as well as those online. As always, we will begin our meeting with the roll call. As always, we will begin the meeting with the roll call.
Chair Tostin.
Present.
Vice Chair Graff.
Present.
Commissioner Estes.
Present.
Commissioner Hamilton. Commissioner Liu. Present. Commissioner Lopez. Commissioner Michaud. Commissioner Notch.
Present.
Commissioner Oyakawa. Commissioner Ruiz.
Present.
Commissioner Snipes.
Present.
Commissioner Sorter.
Present.
Commissioner Tupalian. Commissioner Wilkins.
Present.
Commissioner Ding.
Present.
Commissioner Tux-Jargle.
Present.
Thank you. We will now move into the flag salute led by Commissioner Snipes and Commissioner Tux-Jargle. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Vice Chair Groff, will you review the agenda for us, please?
Yes, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today as we have our second day of the Advisory Commission. But before I get into the agenda, just a few reflections on yesterday. I have to say, having been in the field of special education, and I'm going to say it, for over 40 years, yesterday was one of the most hopeful days that I've had in a very long time, and I'm very optimistic based on the, well, first of all, the seating of our two commissioners who are students and to hear their voices and comments yesterday, but also I think the focus of the agenda as well as the comments on keeping our focus on students and being student-centered and the notion of belonging. And I think if we can keep that theme of thinking about belonging and being student-centered, because we get presented with a lot of data, and data is great and data is important, but behind the data are individuals, and in this case, students. And so I'm hoping that we can keep our focus on the children that we serve, that we're here to serve. And but again, I'm very hopeful based on our conversations yesterday, and I hope we can continue the optimism today with our agenda. So let's get into the agenda. So starting first with item 10 is the observation protocol for teachers of English learners. Item 11 will be the presentation on the CDE annual performance report, and that's where I'm referring to data, but we have to think again, be the students behind that and their families. We'll have a break around 10:45, going into item 12, where we'll have a presentation on mental health, a very important area. Our lunch break will be around 11:45 to 1 p.m. We come back at 1 to have general public comment. Again, this is an ongoing scheduled time for the public to be able to comment. At 1:20, we'll have the Special Education Director's report, which will be followed by committee study sessions. And then we will have the reporting out of the committees around 2:55. Around 3:30, we'll start discussing the agenda for the February meeting, and the meeting will conclude with general public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Groff.
And so moving into communications and announcements, as always, I want to remind the commissioners and presenters, as well as myself, to be mindful of our pace as we're talking, as we rely on our interpreters to help our communication. And for our teammates who are interpreting, if you need to flag us to slow down, please do so. Also want to take a moment to acknowledge our teammates from CDE, as well as those in the control room who help us communicate. And please let us know if there's anything that we can do to make sure you guys have a great day at work. With that, want to also share that the virtual folder has been updated with a document, and I want to thank Commissioner Topalian for sharing that information. It is a memo related to an update regarding the Larry P practices. It's an updated Larry P guidance paper that is in your document, as well as important deadlines for the February meeting date that we'll be talking about during agenda planning. We've worked with our teammates at CDE to further refine the timeline for agenda prep so that everyone knows here are the dates we need presentations by and how we can make sure we're approaching that in an efficient manner. So I want to pause there. Any questions from commissioners or additional announcements? One more announcement that we can talk about during our committee time. I believe in our February meeting is where we begin our election cycle. Currently, Commissioner Topalian has been the chair of the elections committee. It's my understanding that she may be terming out in December, and so we'll need someone or two folks, as we learned last year. Commissioner Topalian was the chair last year during the elections and had a reason not to be able to join us, an emergency, and so she wasn't able to join us on the day of the elections, and so we learned to have a backup. So if you are interested in serving as the chair for the elections committee, I just want to give you some time to begin thinking about that. I believe our bylaws are also in the folder so you can review the roles. We would ask that if you are planning on running for one of the two offices that you would not seek to also serve as the elections chair. With that, I believe we are ready to move into item 10. Are the presenters online? Okay. We are very happy for the update, and Director Moreno Ramirez, thank you so much for your time this morning and making sure that this was on our radar and our agenda for discussion. We yield the floor to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chair Tostin, Vice Chair Groff, and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I am Alicia Moreno Ramirez, Director of the Multilingual Support Division, or MSD, at the California Department of Education. I have with me today Gekikula Zamini, Administrator of the Language Policy and Leadership Office in MSD, as well as additional colleagues from the Language Policy and Leadership Office who are assisting with note-taking today. We are here to provide an update. And forgive me, I can't tell if the slides are. There we go. Thanks. We are here to provide an update on the observation protocol for teachers of English learners, or OPTEL, to share implications for teachers of English learner or EL students, including special education teachers, and to elicit input from ACSE in advance of an upcoming recommendation to the California State Board of Education, or SPPI. The OPTEL is intended for teachers of English learner students who take the summative English language proficiency assessments for California, or LPAC, including students with individualized education plans or 504 plans for the purpose of reclassification. Today's presentation will cover the following: providing background on the OPTEL context, describing the development of the OPTEL, outlining OPTEL uses and limitations, discussing benefits for special education educators and dually identified students, previewing the CDE's forthcoming recommendation, detailing support for implementation and next steps, and eliciting input from ACSE commissioners. Next, I will offer some brief context for the OPTEL tool. English learners and dually identified students. The OPTEL was designed for teachers of EL students, including dually identified students. And as you may recall, English learners are students who enroll in California school at any grade level, have a language other than English identified on the home language survey, and upon assessment have demonstrated a level of English language proficiency that indicates EL programs and services are necessary. Students identified as ELs receive programs and services until they meet the reclassification criteria pursuant to Education Code Section 313. Dually identified students are those who are identified as English learners and also as children with disabilities under the Individuals with Disabilities Act. Dually identified students receive both EL programs and services and special education and related services. Local educational agencies must ensure that eligibility for special education services is not based on English language proficiency. English learners, inclusive of dually identified students, are entitled to all services and supports for EL students, including but not limited to integrated and designated English language development instruction, and participation in an annual language assessment with the goal or expectation of reclassification and exit from EL status. Education Code Section 313F outlines 4 reclassification criteria which provide an expectation of what is needed for an EL student, including dually identified students, to be considered proficient in English. Reclassification is a comprehensive process where all 4 criteria are to be met for a student to be considered for reclassification. Criterion 1 is assessment of language proficiency using an objective assessment instrument. Criterion 2 is teacher evaluation, including but not limited to a review of pupils' curriculum mastery. Criterion 3, parental opinion and consultation. And Criterion 4, comparison of the performance of the pupil in basic skills that demonstrates whether the pupil is sufficiently proficient in English to participate effectively in curriculum designed for pupils of the same age whose native language is English. Next, we will go to statutory requirements and authority. Federal law requires that each state educational agency establish and implement standardized statewide procedures for EL students, both to enter and to exit from EL status and language instruction educational programs. The SPE has approved the threshold for Criterion 1 on the summative English language proficiency assessments for California, or LPAC, and the alternate LPAC in California is working to further standardize criteria 2 through 4. Assembly Bill 1808 requires the CDE to develop a standardized English language teacher observation protocol for use by teachers in evaluating a pupil's English language proficiency. And Education Code Section 313.3a specifies that the observation protocol will support use by teachers in evaluating a pupil's English language proficiency as required by paragraph 2, subdivision F of Section 313, otherwise known as Reclassification Criterion 2, Teacher Evaluation. The OPTEL on which we are focused in today's conversation may be used to support the statewide standardization of Criterion 2, Teacher Evaluation, and Criterion 3, Parent Opinion and Consultation during classification, if approved by the SPE. And now I will hand the presentation over to Gikigula Dlamini to discuss some additional details about the OPTEL.
Good morning, ACSE commissioners. My name is Gekukula Dlamini. I am the administrator of the Language Policy and Leadership Office in the Multilingual Support Division here at CDE. I will offer some additional background on the OPTEL, including its development. What is the OPTEL? The OPTEL is an observation protocol designed to support educators in monitoring and evaluating the academic language use of EL students per the requirements of California Education Code. It will be used to satisfy reclassification criteria 2 and 3 and bring California closer to fulfilling the requirement of statewide standardization of exit criteria as required by Title III. I'd like to offer a brief timeline of the OPTEL's development. The development of the OPTEL began in December 2018 and will conclude in December 2023. The first field test began in February 2020 and then was halted due to the COVID-19 school closures. After several extensions, OPTEL development resumed in late 2022. The OPTEL field test was restarted in January of 2023 with the same goals and overall structure as the prior field test and was conducted through May of 2023 this year. As required in law, the CDE was to consult with the current content area teachers at different grade levels, ELD teachers, bilingual teachers, special education teachers, and experts with demonstrated experience in observing and documenting student academic language practices and in developing and administering assessments for English learner students. The CDE convened the OPTEL Advisory Committee, also known as the OAC, 3 times. In May of 2023, the CDE met with the OAC to review the data from the field test and obtain recommendations for the tool and its rollout. Earlier this week, an SPE information memorandum and the OPTEL validation study were published, and next month the CDE will submit and present an action item recommending that the SPE approve the use of the OPTEL as a standardized protocol for EL students for Criterion 2, teacher evaluation of EL students, and Criterion 3, parent opinion and consultation for the purpose of reclassification. Prior to taking the OPTEL to the SPE for action, we are requesting ACSE input today as part of that continued development process. This input will influence the user guide and materials. Please also note future validation studies will also be recommended. Let's review the OPTEL's purpose. The OPTEL was designed by teachers to evaluate a pupil's use of English while engaging in academic content learning and to allow teachers to assess language practices across a range of proficiency levels. It was also designed to be used for all EL students who take the LPAC, including students with disabilities who have individualized education programs or IEPs, and by content area teachers at all grade levels, ELD teachers, bilingual teachers, and special education teachers. And finally, the tool was designed for ease of use by educators. With respect to engaging special education experts, the OAC included various perspectives, including those of special education educators and specialists. The OAC membership included 4 educators with education specialist instruction credentials. The OAC also included the Imperial County Special Education Local Plan Area, or SELPA, which serves as a SELPA resource lead in the statewide system of support and is a leading provider of professional learning to support duly identified students. The OPTEL field test also included special education teachers and students with IEPs. The purpose of the field test that took place from January to May of 2023 was to collect evidence of the OPTEL's usability, reliability, validity, to support reclassification decisions for English learner students. The field test was initiated to ensure the OPTEL protocol appropriately assesses the intended target language constructs, demonstrates a meaningful relationship to the performance levels for the LPAC, assesses classroom language use, and reflects student progress towards attaining targeted constructs. On your screen is some of the data used as part of the validation study. Notably, 5.3% of educators reported having a special education certification, and 12.3% of students in the sample were identified as having an IEP. Please note, less than 1% of students observed in the field test had a Section 504 plan. Moving on to key findings. One key finding of the validation study is that the participating educators consistently reported that the OPTEL tool is easy to use and feasible for use in the classroom. Let's now take a look at the OPTEL tool. When evaluating a student with the OPTEL tool, educators are asked to specify if the student has an IEP or a 504 plan, and the OPTEL provides space to elaborate on any accommodations used during the evaluation. The OPTEL parent consultation form similarly captures the detail of whether the student has an IEP or a 504 plan. Additionally, the parent consultation form includes a large fillable area for the educator to provide notes on the discussion that occurred with the parent. These intentional opportunities give educators a chance to provide context that is specific to the student they are observing and the discussion they're having with parents. I will now describe the uses and limitations of the OPTEL tool. As noted earlier, the OPTEL will support the standardization of criteria applied to exit EL students from EL services for reclassification criterion 2 as a tool for educators to use when determining and documenting a student's English language proficiency via expressive skills, speaking and writing, and receptive skills, listening and reading. It will also be used for reclassification criterion 3, a parent consultation form designed to guide educators in consultation with parents of English learners regarding their students' progress towards English proficiency as part of the reclassification process. Additionally, educators will be able to use the OPTEL to provide evidence that contributes to the reclassification decisions for all EL students, including those with IEPs and 504 plans, to evaluate student use of English while engaging in academic content learning, and to assess language practices across a range of proficiency levels. Further, the OPTEL is aligned with the ELD standards and the LPAC performance levels. In addition to the intended uses described, the OPTEL can also be used as a formative assessment tool to support student progress toward English proficiency. It can also be used by institutions of higher education that prepare educators in teacher preparation programs. The OPTEL has been validated for the application by teachers of duly identified students with IEPs and 504 plans who take the general summative LPAC. However, the tool was not validated for duly identified students with the most significant cognitive disabilities because less than 1% of students observed took the summative alternate LPAC in 2022-2023, making the sample size too small. Let's move to the benefits. The use of the OPTEL provides various benefits to teachers and students. Some of the benefits to special education teachers and the students they serve include: teachers of duly identified students have access and support to implement a validated, standardized tool to objectively observe duly identified students and consult with families. Duly identified student experiences will be more consistent with the application of the OPTEL to help fulfill reclassification criteria 2 and 3. Application of reclassification criteria 2 and 3 will be more consistent across classrooms, schools, and district. And the OPTEL tool can be used and can help to scaffold parent consultations. Now I have the pleasure of welcoming back Alicia Moreno Ramirez, our director. Thank you.
Thank you, Kula. I wanted to provide an update regarding the upcoming recommendation to the State Board of Education. In November 2023, the CDE MSD will take an action item involving the OPTEL to the SPPI. The CDE intends to recommend that the California SPE approve the following: recommended OPTEL tool to satisfy Criterion 2, teacher evaluation, and Criterion 3, parent opinion and consultation for reclassification per the requirements of California Education Code Section 313 and 313.3. Now, I will describe how the CDE is preparing to offer support for implementation, specifically for special education educators and the students they serve, as well as next steps. Pending SPE approval of the OPTEL, the CDE will begin a rollout of resources and supports for implementation that are currently under development. These include implementation webinars and presentations, including shareable presentation materials that can be utilized with educators across the field. Videos and user guide on how to use the OPTEL, including guidance for use with duly identified students. What-if documents reflective of diverse student scenarios. In-depth explanation of the performance descriptors connected to the ELD standards. Sample scripts for consulting with parents. Updates to the CDE reclassification webpage and frequently asked questions. And in addition, the CDE is developing specific guidance to ensure the OPTEL tool is used appropriately with students on IEPs and 504 plans, given their unique experiences and needs. Next steps. Plans for structured and supported implementation are underway. A rollout, including training and sharing of OPTEL implementation resources, is set to begin in January of 2024. Full implementation is anticipated effective July 2024. And also of interest for future potential consideration is the development of an alternate OPTEL, which may be aligned to the alternate LPAC and CDE connectors. At this stage in the presentation, the CDE would like to take a moment to elicit the input of ACSE commissioners. In particular, as we consider how to best engage with the field of special education teachers of dually identified students, the CDE would value the input of ACSE around 3 questions in particular. Number 1, what contexts and forums might the CDE utilize to engage special education educators around the OPTEL and its uses? Number 2, how might the CDE disseminate information about the OPTEL implementation to educators of dually identified students? And number 3, what types of guidance might most benefit special education educators to support OPTEL implementation? And we would now like to leave some space for the thoughts of ACSE commissioners.
Firstly, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm a student board member of CARS Plus, which I think would be a great organization to disseminate all of this information. And I know that Lana Tellis, the president of CARS Plus, is here with us today. And I feel like a lot of special educators would find this tool useful. And building on that, I know it's very easy to attach labels of like a dually identified student, that they're both an EOD learner and on an IEP or a special education student. But I really appreciated a presentation we heard yesterday that emphasizes like a continuum of students who are dynamic learners and need that whole child support. And I just wanted to ask, from that slide with all the data on, I think it was slide number
14 maybe?
Yes, number 14. I was wondering, do we get any specific feedback from special educators who use this tool with special education students on like, was it easy to evaluate the students along with their accommodations, even if you might be like a different type of learner or need different environments or accommodations in terms of like their English development?
Thank you for the question and also the recommendation for forum. We did get a general consensus across the board, across all educators who participated in the field test, and they generally reported that there was ease of use. I think one of the features of the OPTEL that makes it a viable tool is the fact that it is used in any educational context. So if a student is already in the midst of learning as part of a lesson and the teacher is already set with the accommodations in place, it wouldn't change the structure of the lesson. It would essentially mean that the teacher is observing that student experience as was designed to be per the calls within the IEP or 504 plan.
This is Vice Chair Graff, and also an additional resource. We'll try it again. I have the Zoom on, so try this. Is that better? Okay, very good. We're good. I also wanted to add an additional forum of California Council on Teacher Education and also the California Association of Professors of Special Education. We prepare the educators to work with students with disabilities as well as with Cal Council, all the university programs that prepare teachers, and so I think those would be 2 additional forums. We do have Commissioner Topalian who has her hand raised, so Commissioner Topalian. I believe you're on mute, or we can't hear you.
Do you hear me now? That's a first, right? Hello? Okay, so thank you for the presentation. I think it's great that you guys are including more than just a checklist. It's about asking the parents and gathering that information and the duly, identified students as well and seeing their progress. I'm just wondering, maybe the forums of speech and language pathologists, maybe school psychologists, and anybody else who works in the field with students with disabilities, just how we could use this and utilize this as a process, not only, I'll slow down, not only, for assessment, but also as a tiered support of how we intervene, using it with the student study teams, using it within the multi-tiered system of support as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the suggestions, Commissioner Topalian, and thank you also, Vice Chair Graff. We appreciate the ideas with forums, but also the application. That will definitely inform our guidance in the user guide development.
Commissioner.
Hi there, my name is Saran. I'm also one of the youth commissioners. And thank you for coming in for this presentation. And I do actually have a few questions, but my most question that I have right now is, so an idea that I would like to propose is this, the slide that Rachel just asked for, that slide. I feel like we should make the survey required for all educators of the state. Because here's the thing, I'm going to be the most honest right now. I feel like a lot of educators in special ed, they do not follow these protocols, these ideas, these things, these practices that you're telling me right now. I would love it to see every single educator, every single district, every single county actually do the survey. So we actually get a precise data, because this data right now, it's giving me like 2/3 of California. It's not giving me so much. And this is voluntary work, I understand. But I would love it for everyone in California, all of our educators, all of our principals, admin districts, and counties, and county Department of Education to actually implement this and make sure to get all of our educators to do the survey and make it required. And one of my questions is this: is doing this OPTEL for our educators required? If not, I would love to propose to make it required for all of our educators to do this, make sure that they have the credentials to even educate our learners, because you know what I mean? Educated learners equals to educated, happy students.
Thank you so much for your thoughts and your suggestion. And I would concur that the CDE really strives to make this tool applicable and usable and used by educators across the state. Any educator with English learner students and dually identified students in the classroom, we really hope to see widespread application. Thank you.
Here, Tostin.
Thank you so much for the presentation. And just a few quick questions. What is the required length of the observation?
Excellent question. Thank you, Chair. There's no required duration of a lesson, which I think is actually a benefit of the tool, in that a teacher might have a 15-minute lesson in which they are observing the student, but they also might have an extended lesson. So it's very flexible according to the natural context and the kind of organic way that a classroom flows. So there's no time limit. I would suggest a 15-minute lesson might be a good range of time to observe a student at minimum, but there's no specific requirement.
And thank you. And so just clarifying, if I'm the teacher providing the observation, would I be observing a student that is part of my class or part of my caseload, or is it a more neutral observation where Vice Chair Groff would come observe a student in my classroom?
I think that there is local control with respect to decision making around application. So whether or not it's the direct teacher or a coach or a supporting educator, that really is up to the school and the classroom context. I think most ideally a teacher has the most information about the student, not only at that point in time, but with regard to the whole child's experience. And so I think a recommendation might be to have that the main teacher do the observation, but it's certainly flexible.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the channels for dissemination I might suggest is the California Association of Bilingual Educators, using that communication channel to promote the information and share information. And another question I have, I know it's an observation form, but is there a central database that all of this information will be in? Is it collected in SACE? Is it collected in one of the other student information systems?
It won't be collected on a statewide level. I appreciate the question. However, one of the things that does happen as part of reclassification already is that teachers are already observing students and gathering information to inform the reclassification process. And so internally within a school site or a district, they may already have structures for collecting that data on a local level. But statewide collection, there is no plan to collect that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sorter.
In terms of a request number 3, the guidance, the support for implementation, you have a lot of great resources. I know teachers appreciate short videos. I think one of the great things is the what if. and FAQs in as many scenarios as you could possibly think of so that they have somewhere to go. And then I just had a question about the potential consideration for an alternative alignment to the alternative LPAC. Where is that currently standing? Because I know that will be a question that comes up for our students with more severe disabilities.
Thank you for the question. One thing I will say is kind of going back to the history. When the OPTEL was conceived and when it was written into law, it was pre-development and pre-call for the alternate LPAC. So as designed, this OPTEL was intentionally from conception designed to connect to the LPAC and the ELD standards. Now that we have an alternate LPAC in place, there is definitely an interest in exploring the potential for a future alternate OPTEL that would align with the alternate LPAC assessment as well as the ELD connectors. However, there's not a call for development yet, but it is on our radar as something that's desirable for the future.
Commissioner Topalian.
Thank you. Sorry, I forgot to ask last time. Also, another group perhaps I know is doing a lot of work with bilingual and ELD is the Imperial Valley SELPA. I'm not sure if you guys have reached out to them as well, because perhaps just getting their idea as well with Deborah Montoya and her team as well. So just FYI.
Thank you. They're excellent partners, and we are definitely tapping their expertise. Thank you so much.
Another question that I have is what measures does OPTEL have in place if teachers and educators do not adhere to the protocols? How does the OPTEL address non-compliance and ensure that all protocols are effectively implemented for the benefit of English learners and IEPs? So what do you guys do if these teachers do not follow these protocols? What does the state do? What does that look like? And what is the action plan?
Thank you for that question. There is not anything in statute that makes this protocol required. So I want to make sure that I clarify that. However, one of the things that we are really mindful of is ensuring that teachers have the professional learning, the training, the resources in order to make this tool accessible and desirable. In particular, given that the 4 reclassification criteria are consistently in place and teachers are already observing students for the purpose of making recommendations, and they are already needing to consult with parents around student potential readiness for reclassification. We hope that the ease of use and the robust nature of the resources and materials provided will make it a really desirable tool for use by all teachers of English learners students.
Just a follow-up question, and I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So I'm going back to slide 6, and where there are the 4 components of reclassification. Understanding that the OPTEL is optional, I just want to make sure I understand. It is one of the options that could be used for reclassification, in addition to the assessment, parent opinion and consultation, and then the comparison of performance.
Actually, to clarify, those 4 criterion must all be in place in order for a student to be considered. So they must demonstrate readiness according to, in this case, the LPAC. They must also demonstrate readiness with regard to basic skills in English, and they must also be evaluated by the teacher, and the parent must also be consulted and provide their opinion. So all 4 pieces work as a comprehensive process. And so in order for a student to be considered for reclassification, a teacher would have to, or an IEP team or an English learner consult team would need to ensure that all of these criteria are met. And the teacher evaluation and the parental opinion and consultation right now are done without a standardized tool in place across the state. So the OPTEL is really intending to standardize that exit process with a consistent tool for teacher evaluation and parent opinion and consultation.
Thank you so much for that clarification. I was missing that piece. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, my last question is, so how do we know that these programs for students and our parents with a second language and disabilities, how they actually support our students, not burden them? Because as a I used to be an LPAC student, and to be honest, going through the process was a lot of work. It was painful. It was dreading, because I had to, when I was little, my parents put me as Mongolian as my first language, even though it wasn't true because I was a U.S. citizen and my English was my first language. And there were so many processes, and I was like, why do we need this process? And a lot of students feel very burnt out with these programs. So I want to know, what is the success rate of this? How do we know that these programs actually help our students with disabilities and not burn them? What's the success rate, and what are we implementing? What's our initiatives for this?
That is a very valid and very important question, and I think that that global desire to understand impact and results, I think for dually identified students in particular is so critical. I will say that one of the things that we continue to watch is reclassification rates, and we're also, of course, in close partnership with the Special Education Division to better understand the needs of dually identified students. I think generally across the state, of course, we want to close the opportunity gap and the achievement gap for these students. And we know that one of the things that's so important to doing that is ensuring that our English learner students have a strong foundation in the English language in order to fully access the core curriculum. And I think that is part of this overarching message. If we provide the language resources and meet the requirements of federal civil rights law, then we're better preparing our students for success in the future.
Thank you. I will ask if you could share the slide for public comment, and any members of the public in the room wishing to make comment, if you would begin lining up. And so Director Moreno-Ramirez and Mr. Dalimi, thank you so much for your time and clarification. I know that in my experience as a special educator, understanding the EL system, the processes, came much later in my career, and so I appreciate your intentionality in ensuring that there's great outreach and continued capacity building in the field, recognizing the number of students who are duly identified in California continues to grow, and as shared by Commissioner Tugg-Struggle, our sensitivities and understanding of how our best intentions impact students continues to have room for growth, refinement, and involvement. And so we appreciate not just the information, but your commitment to doing what's right for students. I see there is one public comment in the room, and so we will invite you up and continue to display the screen for call-in public comment.
Morning. So just once more, my name is Lana Tayes. I'm from the CARS Plus, California Association of Resource and Special Educators in California. One thing I just want to note that I was really happy to see that the advisory committee included special educators. I thought that was like a hooray for us. It was exciting to see that actual people in the field currently were a part of that process. So that makes us happy. The other thing, as far as input on the 3 questions, I would like to invite CDE to include CARS. I know Commissioner Ding mentioned us, but I'd also invite them to come and be a part of our convention in February 23rd and 24th. That's a really good way to engage and disseminate information there, and along with not just OPTEL, but with other issues related to English language proficiency. So thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comments in the room, we will transition to public comments online.
There's no callers waiting.
Okay. So at this point, we will close public comment. And Director Moreno-Ramirez, before we go, I just want to make sure this was a circumstance where you simply needed input from ACSE, not an official action or recommendation prior to going to State Board. I just want to make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time, Chair Tosta, and thank you so much to the Commission.
All right. Thank you. So we are a few moments ahead of schedule, about 12, but our next presenter is in the room. And so, if it's okay with you, Shiloh, can we? All right. So we will move into our annual performance report provided by the Department of Special Education.
Commissioners, my name is Shyla Duncan Besserfield. I am the Interim Director of Special Education for, looks like, about 30 more days. It's very exciting. My permanent role is the Associate Director of Special Education, which I am over all of monitoring data and the special education system of support. And so I'm coming to you today in that official capacity to present the annual performance report, which is a required report for the U.S. Department of Education. I'm going to provide a lot of data and information as part of this. For those of you who have been around a while, you know this is a relatively data-heavy presentation. I appreciate that we didn't do it right after lunch, as in to lull you to sleep. But this is a required report that we submit to the U.S. Department of Education that ensures the continuance of $1.3 billion from the federal government to fund programs and supports for students with disabilities in California. This is an action item, so I want to sort of put that right up front for you all. We will need action on this item in order to move it forward to the State Board of Education, which provides its final approval for submission in January. What I always start with is just a little bit of background about where we are with in special education and for children with disabilities. And I think this is going to provide a good foundational discussion for some of the data that you're going to see. This data is based on 22-23. And if you, I can go back to the first slide, it says federal fiscal year 22. So that's the 22-23 school year. That's the way the U.S. Department of Education puts that together. And so this is one of the first years post-COVID school disruption that we're seeing data. So almost all students are back in school regularly in person at this point, and they are receiving in-person instruction. And now we're addressing some of the learning issues that have resulted from the more virtual instruction that occurred in 2020 and 2021. What I do want to show you here when I think this is important is we get questions a lot about, has there been an increase in students with disabilities? And the answer for the better part of almost 13 years is yes. We do see an increase in the number of students with disabilities. On any given day, we have about 820,000 students with disabilities in California. Those students are they come in and they come out, but they are served in about 10,000 public schools and 2,200 local education agencies throughout the state. We are by far the largest state in the U.S. that serves students with disabilities. Our student with disability population is larger than most states' total student population. So it is quite a challenge, and I think it's important to understand that as we talk about the indicators, because a shift in sometimes 1 or 2 percentage points can be a huge number of students that are improving or changing. I also like to show this because I think it's important for us to understand how we identify in comparison to the total student population. And I think it's worth noting that since 2012, we have seen a decrease in the number of K-12 students served in public schools here in California, but we have not seen that equivalent decrease that occurs for our students with disabilities population, meaning we are serving fewer total students, but more students with disabilities. And you can kind of see the percentage of students with disabilities increase over time from 2012 to today, so the better part of the last 10 years. In fact, we are serving about 13.1% of our students. That number is going to become kind of important for our next slide. I'm kind of echoing in here, and I don't know how to address that. I'm sorry. But we are, that 13% is going to become important for some discussion I'm going to have later. And so this is a slide I've shown. Yes?
Right. Quick question on the last slide. Just making sure so the far right column, total number of students birthed through age 22, K-12 students, does that include our adult students, the 18 to 22-year-olds as well?
It does. So all students who are age 18 to 22 are served in, who have an IEP are in 12th grade. That's how we categorize them. When we talk about the birth through age 22, we are talking here about the students who are served in our 619 program, which is our preschool program, ages 3 through 5, and students who are served in our infant program that are served by LEAs. So in California, we serve some of our infant and toddlers in LEAs, about 5,000 of them. There are an additional about 65,000 that are served through the Part C program through the Department of Developmental Services. They are not included in this number. So that 13%, this is where it becomes important, because when we look at comparing other LCFF categories to students with IEPs, you'll find that students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, students who are foster, and students who are English language learners make up a greater proportion of students with IEPs than in the general population. And what I mean by that, when I say there's 13.1% of all students have disabilities, and now we see that 14% of students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged have IEPs, while 30% of students who are in foster care have IEPs, and 17% of students who are English language learners have IEPs. So it's significant to kind of understand that there is a large overlap between what's happening in the LCFF subgroups and also students with IEPs. It's also, I think, really important to note that about 70% of students with IEPs are in one or more of the LCFF student groups. And the reason that I like to show these two slides in particular is because when you look at districts who are identified for differentiated assistance for through the LCFF, they are students, oftentimes the student with disability subcategory is a category that is most regularly identified. Y'all see now why we need to do this before lunch. There's a lot of data here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the annual performance report. This is a required report by the U.S. Department of Education. They require us to submit 2 sets of data in order to ensure that we continue to receive our federal funds. One of those is this annual performance report, and the other one is a set of data tables that we submit twice per year. And so we also set a set of targets. Those targets are reviewed by the Advisory Commission once every 6 years and provided final approval for these indicators by the State Board of Education. Our website, you can find previous APRs and state systemic improvement plans online here. So I like to split up the indicators into 2 sets because there's compliance indicators and performance indicators. Compliance indicators tend to be things like timeline or compliance reviews, and they will always have a target of 0 or 100%. We actually don't get any ability to set those targets. We are given those targets by the U.S. Department of Education. The performance indicators are different, so I will talk about those in a little bit. So here's our compliance indicators. I will not be going over each and every one, but I do provide this here, and I also believe that you were provided a summary document of all the indicators that you can see in this this table and the future tables. We don't typically meet these targets. So if you see that we didn't meet it, it was not because we didn't try really hard or we weren't really close. It was because these targets are 100%, meaning if we are at 99.9, we do not meet the target. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of these compliance indicators. We do not currently have the compliance indicators for indicators 4, 9, and 10, but I can tell you right now we did not meet those indicators. Those targets are 0%, and I know for a fact that we did have non-compliance associated with them. But I do want to talk a little bit about our disproportionality system. Yes, sir.
Can we just have a little bit more information about why the results aren't available?
Sure. So this has to do a little bit with timing. Unfortunately, we have, and you'll find this with some performance indicators as well, we don't have the data yet for these indicators. These and the assessment indicators, we don't have them yet. Remember, this is based on the 22-23 year. The data for this just closed in August. And then we also then need to complete a file and compliance review. So the data just isn't complete yet. Same thing for assessment. The assessment window occurred all the way through June, I think, this year. And so we just don't have the assessment scores for the statewide assessment yet. We will have them in January, so we don't anticipate a delay there. Y'all don't have a December meeting, so I can't give you the most up-to-date data. We're happy to come back at a future date and bring you the complete sets of data. So disproportionality is the early warning system for significant disproportionality. I know I'm not talking about the indicators here, but I do kind of want to talk about what we mean by significant disproportionality. So significant disproportionality and disproportionality are essentially very similar in that they identify whether or not a district is identifying, suspending, or placing students in more restrictive placements based on their race or ethnicity. And so we look at that 1 year, the district is disproportionate, and we ask them to make changes. We give them another year to implement those changes. If by the 3rd year they're still continue to be significantly disproportionate, we will make them significantly disproportionate, meaning we're going to set aside some of their funds for use to create a plan for improvement. This is a requirement under law. So the reason I tell you this is because the data that we use from the annual performance report is like step 1 and step 2 of the significant disproportionality process. But we do not report significant disproportionality in our annual performance report. If you work with LEAs, though, it's always an issue that they're going to bring up. So it's important to know where it comes from. The other indicator that I kind of wanted to touch on was the child find indicator. So that's indicator 11. We increased the percentage. Again, this is a 100% indicator, so even if you're at 99.9, we would not meet the target. But we did increase the number of students who were identified and evaluated on time. So when we're talking about child find for this indicator, we're talking about the percent of children who are identified and evaluated within 60 days of receiving parent consent. And so we have not met that indicator, but I think it's important to note that I had more students who had requests for parent consent and for whom we provided that required evaluation within 60 days than we've had probably in the last 7 or 8 years. And as you can see from this table, we had well over 135,000 students requesting evaluation and more than 130,000 receiving their evaluation timely. That is a very large number. So yes, we did not make the 60-day timeline for some of those LEAs, or for some of those children, but for the majority of them we did. And for each one of those that did not make the 60-day timeline, that is considered a non-compliance for the LEA, and they are issued corrective action if it was sort of the fault of the LEA. So we look a little bit deeper into that. So I just kind of wanted to provide you some context here, because a lot of folks go, well, you only improved 0.04%. Like, well, it was a lot of evaluations we have to do. So we have to be able to give some kudos where we can. I also want to overview the performance indicators. These performance indicators are things that we set targets for. And I think about 4 years ago, you all worked with us to set those targets. I know we did a lot of study sessions around that. And then these targets were approved by the U.S. Department of Education. I like to put these performance targets on a pathway because I think it's important for us to understand that the way we measure student success with these indicators is really looking at the path that children take as they work through their educational career. And so when students start with preschool LRE, and school age LRE, those are placement indicators. We believe that placing students in the right placements with the right supports is the very beginning. And based on that, we believe that if students are placed correctly and they're given the supports that they need, they're going to have fewer disciplinary results, they're going to have better statewide assessment outcomes, and they're going to graduate and be able to access college and career after graduation. So you can see as we talk about these indicators, it's really about following the path of success for children as we move through this process. I know I talk about indicators. This feels very clinical when we're talking about it, but this is really what we're talking about here. I kind of already just touched on this, but this is really our theory of action for all the work that we do. Our belief that children who are in the right placement, with the right supports, exposed to high quality instruction, will have a reduction in behavior problems and an increased learning that's exhibited through achievement scores. And those will lead to higher rates of graduation and access to post-school achievement. So it's really about our belief about where we can put our efforts. I'll talk a little bit more about that with the state systemic improvement plan in a few moments. There's a lot of performance indicators. There are actually 17 indicators in the entire APR, and the majority of them are performance indicators. In 2020, the U.S. Department of Education published sort of a reset of some of the indicators. For example, indicator 3 went from having 3 sub-indicators to having 5, or 4. And so that increased what we had to do in that. Also, we added a category into indicator 6, was preschool least restrictive environment. So the number of indicators and sub-indicators has only increased over time. And so there is a lot of data and information that we present here, that we present to the U.S. Department of Education to give an idea of where we do our work. I'm not going to talk about every single indicator. If somebody would love to have discussions about every indicator, this is where I started my career at CDE, was working on the APR since 2010. So it is something I am very familiar with, how every indicator is calculated, how every indicator is collected, and what our data has looked like. But I will not be going over that here. I have selected a couple of indicators I would like us to focus on so that you all can see sort of what's happening, and we can discuss some of the challenges that we faced as well. So indicator 6 is a preschool least restrictive environment. This is a challenging indicator, and a lot of it's challenging because even up until 2022, we're still implementing universal TK, UPK, those kinds of things, which don't allow sometimes a lot of openings for students with disabilities to be served in the regular early education program. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we're doing around this, but as you'll see, only about 19% of our children with disabilities ages 3 through 5 are served in a regular preschool program. It's important to note on this indicator, and this is the one caveat I will give about it, is that this is for children for whom they receive the majority of their services in the preschool program. And so when we're thinking about mental models and the way that preschool programs and special education has been administered traditionally, what we often see is, for example, if a student receives speech services, that happens outside of the preschool classroom. Like you go and you work with a speech therapist outside of a preschool program. That's traditionally how we've seen it. And so some of the work we've been doing, and we have a technical assistance center that's really focused on early childhood work, is kind of rethinking some of that, but it will take time for us to get there. The other reason that you'll see a pretty significant change in this indicator if you go back several years is because starting in 2021, we no longer count students who are in kindergarten and also 5 years old. So it used to be if you were 5 years old and kindergarten, you were counted in this indicator. That you're now included, those students are now included in the school age least restrictive environment. And so this really gives us, I think, a really good picture, as it should give us, about how students who are in really early childhood programs are treated and how they're placed and where they receive their services. So We are making a lot of investments around preschool, which I'm really excited about. And if our Deputy Superintendent, Sarah Neville Morgan, was here, she would just spend all day with you talking about this. This is her passion area. And so, but I'm just going to briefly talk about this because I still have quite a bit to go through. In that children with IEPs or IFSPs will be eligible for California state preschool programs. There's a set in phased requirement to reserve enrollment for a percentage of students with disabilities in California state preschool program. We've also identified $2 million to incorporate early learning identification for learning disabilities into the state preschool program assessment tools, which is very exciting. And I talked recently, or a couple minutes ago, about our California Early Childhood Special Education Network. That is a technical assistance center we have funded through the state to provide support to LEAs to address inclusion work, to address C2B transition, to address equity, in addition to our more traditional Supporting Inclusive Practices project, which has come here, I think, a few times to talk to you all about their work, has also focused very highly on early childhood. I also want to talk about least restrictive environment. This is, I think, a really important indicator. If we talk about our foundational work, getting students in the right placement with the right supports is the cornerstone of the improvement process for us. When you look at this indicator over time, you have the tendency to feel a little sad because we grow 1% per year, which is not that much when you look at sort of the grand scheme of things. But it is improvement. And you'll see we improved about 0.5% from this year to last year. The thing that I do like to remind folks is for every percentage point that we move the needle on this, we are changing the placement to more inclusive environments for all students with disabilities in the equivalence of San Francisco Unified. So it's about 8,000 students. So when you think about that, it is a lot of work. There is change that's happening. Part of this challenge we have is because we're such a big state, that change is just happening very incrementally. We are making a lot of investments in this work, so I think we will continue to see improvement. Will we see the improvement where as fast as we would like? That I wish I had a crystal ball for. The other thing I think that's kind of exciting for us to also note is that we are seeing a decrease in the number of students who are in that middle this like what we consider the special day class category, which is 5B, and then a decrease in the number of students who are in separate classrooms, completely separate schools or separate programs. Would love to get to the day when that is at 0%, but we are not there yet. The other indicator I'd like to note is our suspension and expulsion indicator. Now, this is not all suspension and expulsion. And we acknowledge that we continue to have too many students with disabilities who are suspended or expelled. If you look at the data that we have, it is a cornerstone also of our monitoring work and our system of support work. This indicator, though, is for students who are suspended greater than 10 days. And so this, we did increase this number from last year. Last year it was effectively 0. And this year it was 0.67%. So only 0.67% of students with disabilities were suspended for 10 or more days. If you look back historically at this data, you will see that used to be like 4%, 5%. So the fact that we're below 1% is exciting. The question I know folks often raise is, why isn't it 0%? It was 0% last year. If you remember, we did have significant issues. This is a lag year data, so this is actually data from 21-22. And so the previous year was 2020, 2021, and most students were not in physical classrooms during that year. So that's why we see that very low number. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about graduation. This one that's, I think, to me, enlightening and happy to talk about, and I think I'll talk a little bit more in my director's report, since I've got both hats today, around our work in graduation to provide more supports to students who are accessing and getting a regular education diploma. When I first started with the department in 2010, we used to have an indicator in our data called grad plan. I don't know if anyone remembers that. And that had to be filled out for all students who were 14 years or older. And they had to identify at that time whether or not a student was on a graduation track. We have eliminated that indicator, and I really feel like we're moving towards eliminating that mindset, which is really exciting. And some of the work that we've been doing to increase outcomes, to increase more access to regular education, we are seeing more students able to graduate with a regular high school diploma. And we know that is the step to career and college achievement. So, it's not all. I don't always have all the best news, but here's some good news that we can talk about. And an increase of 5% from the previous year, which I think is really exciting. The final thing I want to talk to you about is the State Systemic Improvement Plan. This used to actually be a separate item that I would bring to you all in February. And the reason for that is the U.S. Department of Education allowed us to submit this indicator specifically late. They no longer allow that. They want us to submit it with our regular annual performance report. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about it. I do not have data associated with it, but I do want to talk about the work we're doing around our State Systemic Improvement Plan. And this was sort of a phased plan that came out for all states so that they could identify how they wanted to improve their outcomes for kids with disabilities. And the reason I think it's important for us to talk about that a little bit separately is because in the past for our annual performance reports, we would have to identify each indicator and say how we wanted to improve on each indicator. And anybody who's been around the data long enough knows that there's a lot of intersectionality and interconnectivity in this data, and that if you look at our theory of action, the belief that one sort of pushes some of the other ones, I can't address suspension expulsion if I'm not also addressing placement. So this was really the forethought of the U.S. Department of Education to say, what is your really big plan for addressing the issues in your state? And so that's kind of what we've been working on for the past, the State Systemic Plan came out in 2015, so since that time. There is an implementation portion of it, an analysis portion of it, and an evaluation portion of it. This has been very challenging since 2020. A lot of the work that we've had to do in our State Systemic Improvement Plan is built around our state system of support. And so building up the supports and being proactive around that state system of support has been challenging because we've been very reactive to the things that have been happening in 2020 and subsequently in 2021. But I'm very encouraged. We have a new set of special education leads that I'm sure you will come and talk to you at some point about their work. And we've really built, I think, a system. I talked previously about our compliance and improvement monitoring system. I think that was August or June, one of those days. August. They begin to run together, my apologies. And how they kind of all work together, our monitoring, our system of support, and the data to really help districts improve. So what does this look like in terms of our monitoring? This is basically what our system of support, this is what our State Systemic Improvement Plan is. We have matched the need of LEAs to the support they receive. So in previous years, if you were in monitoring, you would receive the same support as any other district in monitoring. Now, the more intensive your needs are, the more our engagement and our assignment of technical assistance is to you. If you are at the top of that pyramid, you don't get to choose whether you work with us or work with our technical assistance providers. We work with you to design a plan that works for what your needs are, and we assign technical assistance providers that are going to help make that improvement happen. And I talked about this last time I was here. I know this is a pretty busy slide, I apologize, but I think it's important to kind of understand how the system of support works within our own work here at the CDE to push districts to make improvement. So if you worked in an LEA in the past 10 years and you had to work with CDE, the process was you're not doing very well, make a plan. Good, your plan's done, we'll see you later. And then we would come back in a year or two and be like, gosh, Elliot, you're just not getting better. What happened to that great plan? Now this is the work. The work is helping LEAs get to a point where they have a plan and then spending 2 years making sure they can implement that plan. I think what I've heard from LEAs is we've had a plan-nami, like a tsunami of plans over the past several years, and yet no space or time to breathe so that we can actually implement those plans. And so this is CDE, Special Education's version of being able to provide that space. But as you see from these green sections throughout this slide is that we have lots of space where we implement our system of support, our state systemic improvement plan, to help LEAs at every step of the process. Sometimes it's SELPA, sometimes it's an improvement lead, sometimes it's a technical assistance around disproportionality, sometimes it's a content lead, there's all these, sometimes it's EWIG, so there's a lot of support out there. And our work here has been to map them all together for LEAs to use where their needs are at. We also developed our California Special Education Technical Assistance Network. Feels like a workout sometimes. CalTAN, it is a website. That is a website right there. If you go to caltan.info, it will bring up our technical assistance site that provides all the information of all of our technical assistance providers. It provides a lot of technical assistance resources. We are working to reduce some of the work on that site so that it makes it a little bit more user-friendly. And it is, our hope will be a one-stop place for all technical assistance and support for LEAs and anybody who would like to access more information on how to get support for improvement. We also, so last year we republished our Special Education Resource Leads, RFA, for new grant years. We had no more than 10 special education leads in specific areas. The RFA was released almost a year ago, December 15th. We received applications in January, and the grantees were announced in March. And so this is the first year that they are working in our system of support. It's a big part of our state systemic improvement plan is the system of support piece. And these leads are matched in a lot of really, I think, authentic and important ways. We have a UDL lead. We have an English language learner lead. We have an improvement science, our special education improvement leads, the SIL, which you all are, I think, pretty familiar with, leads. We have a lead that's going to focus on inclusion and county office programs. We have a lead that's going to focus on independent improvement around inclusion practices. So there's a lot of work that's happening. We have an alternative dispute resolution lead and an IEP lead. So lots of really good work that's happening, and they're going to continue to roll out and do some of the work. So kind of calling back to my friends in the Multilingual Services Division, they talked a little bit about the English language learner leads. I think at some point, if you would love to hear from the work that they're doing some really good work and have been funded for a number of years. Oh, I got ahead of myself. So yeah, so we have the the IEP lead, the English language learner lead, the alternative dispute resolution lead, the universal design for learning lead, and 3 sort of building capacity leads. What was really cool about how we approached this year is that, or this set of grants, is that the first round was all SELPA focused, and these new sets of leads are a combination of county offices and SELPAs and LEAs all working together. So that's kind of exciting because I think it's going to have a broader reach within our system. We also work very closely with CCEE, the California Collaborative on Educational Excellence. And they assisted in the selection of these leads, and they're also helping us to make sure that as that rolls out, it's strongly connected to the statewide system of support. So let's talk a little bit about the next steps for our annual performance report. It will need to go to the State Board of Education on January 2024. And then if it's approved by the State Board of Education, it will be submitted to the February 1st to the U.S. Department of Education to meet our requirements. And that's all I had. So I'll open it up for commissioner comments. I know there's a lot of questions that typically come up.
Commissioner Stipes?
Thank you very much. Of course, it wouldn't be an ACSE session if I didn't go back to early childhood. Sarah and I could probably spend days and days talking about this, but it's because of the work that I do, seeing the numbers for Indicator 6, it can be really discouraging, and it's something that I'm working with a lot of the LEAs with right now. And one of the things that came up was exactly what you were talking about with speech. Not only are they, if they're in a preschool program, being pulled out for speech, but there's a lot of kids who, because of parent choice, are still at home or in a different setting who are just receiving speech services, and that's within that indicator. And so I'm glad to hear that you're reviewing kind of how that data will be collected. The other thing that kind of has come up in conversations is that the coding versus percentage in and out. So the way that a child is coded, whether they're receiving the majority of services in a setting or if it's outside of a setting, I think that can be a kind of a sticking point, because a lot of special educators who are serving preschool age children have come from a world where you measure by percentage in and out. And so making that switch and making sure coding is appropriate. We see a lot of really bright spots where children are being meaningfully included, and they're also receiving LRE in the most appropriate way. So I think that there are the numbers show a little bit more of a dismal situation than there actually are. So just making sure that special educators understand the difference in coding versus percentage in and out is also another thing that I've kind of noticed. And then when we go back to what was on slide 18 about eligibility criteria and the things that we're doing for early childhood programs within the UPK system, talking about the 10% of students with disabilities needing to be enrolled in state preschool programs, many programs who are inclusive far exceed that. And so that set aside money is already being used up, and we're still finding some challenges with getting children in based on the current eligibility criteria. A lot of students with IEPs are waiting on a waiting list because they're still farther down that eligibility list. So there's still areas where we could definitely make improvements, but I just really appreciate that we're even talking about it in a deeper way. So thank you for sharing about Indicator 6 specifically.
Yeah, I think it's an important indicator for us to think about. This is the on-ramp to the future of inclusion, right? So if you are in an inclusive preschool, you're more likely to be in an inclusive classroom in elementary. If you're in an inclusive classroom in elementary, it's easier to make the argument around, one day I'm going to tackle the master schedule issue. It may not be today, but at some point, right, to address those things. But I think what you hit on was really important, was such around the mental models, right? That I want to keep my child at home, or that my child is, or that the speech only, quote unquote thing. To me, that when I read IDEA, I don't see that. I know that that's a common moniker that people have used, and even the U.S. Department of Education has talked a little bit about it, but there's just students with IEPs, and they are just students and children. And so if we can kind of see them in that way, then it helps to change the idea of where they need to go. But I do think you're right. I think one of the challenges, and the U.S. Department of Education has not been very open about making this change, is that LRE for children who are ages 6 through 22 is vastly different than LRE for children ages 3 through 5. And what I mean by that is a child who's in a classroom for the most of their day in kindergarten is considered fully included, whereas a child who's in a preschool classroom most of their day but receives their speech services somewhere else for an hour a day is considered almost fully excluded. And that's just not the way we should be looking at it. But I think it's going to take time for us to kind of change those thoughts.
It really touches on the least restrictive environment versus meaningful inclusion / belonging, which we talked about yesterday. They're very different things that should not be so different.
Commissioner Notch.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Like Commissioner Snipes in early childhood education, it wouldn't be an ACSE meeting if I didn't ask an alt pathways question. So I was wondering if indicator 1 will be impacted by alt pathways to a diploma, and if so, if the percentages are going to be adjusted, or how that might have an implication on that indicator.
So you're talking about like the AB 181 alternate pathway to a diploma. So yeah, so it wouldn't be represented this year, and it probably won't be represented until 24-25 because the changes to the legislation this year, the students had to be in 9th grade in 22-23. So those students will be eligible for the alternate pathway in 25-26, if I'm doing that math correctly. So they're not represented here yet. They will be represented. It will impact the number itself. I don't know how much though. It's hard for us to say. We've had a lot of discussion around the alternate pathway diploma. Some parents are feeling like, I don't know if we want to do this, it's a lot. And so I think the work for us to kind of walk through that with families and help them understand the importance of this work is going to be something that we're going to be addressing. We're going to be publishing additional FAQs, I think, within the next couple of months to help clarify some of those things.
Commissioner Wilkins.
Thank you for your presentation. I want to just echo what Commissioner Snipes said about preschool LRE. I mean, when my child 4 years ago entered preschool, it was SDC or nothing. And so the idea that the state in such a short period of time is making pretty large gains in that area and is really concentrating on it is commendable. And yes, we still have waiting lists and we have room to grow, but really, I mean, it's a lot of work and to make such significant changes in such a short period of time. I do have a question around 5C, indicator 5C. Are we also seeing a decrease in out-of-state placements?
I don't think we've seen a decrease in out-of-state placements. I would love to see a decrease in out-of-state placements. I think it is an area that we need to address. In some ways, I'm encouraged by the NPS study that's going to come out next year. I haven't seen any of the data with it, so I have no sneak preview or anything. I think they're still working in that space. But that it's going to start asking the questions about why students have to be placed out of state. I think it's a challenge for us to continue to look at that practice. I know there's a necessity, but I think the question really is, how can we create better placements for children here in California? We should be able to do that. And so I think that we are going to start asking those questions more and more as that study is going to start bringing those issues to light. So stay tuned.
And then a follow-up question to that is the MPS study going to also include students who are placed out of state by an entity other than an LEA outside of the IEP process, for instance, like Department of Social Services or regional centers?
Yep. So the Department of Social Services no longer places children out of state. They discontinued that practice, I think, in 2018. As far as regional centers, that I don't know that it's going to address that, but I think it's going to sort of look at some of the continuum of all potential placements.
And then in your slides, it also talked about looking at root cause, with disproportionality. Do we aggregate that at the state level for policymakers to make decisions in terms of what are the root cause statewide?
So I think we're going to be doing that. I think I talked a little bit about that. That's how we match the technical assistance. So over the next couple of years, as we see districts identifying their problem of practice, I think we're going to be able to quantify some of that to be able to say, here's the top 3 or 5 problems of practice that we're seeing coming from LEAs.
Thank you.
I will tell you, inclusion is one of the biggest ones.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ding.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a hardcore stats nerd, so I really appreciate all the data-backed information. I had a question about the impact of COVID and the whole pandemic situation. I was wondering, I know you mentioned on that one data point for suspension and expulsion, it was definitely affected by the pandemic, but were other data figures as well impacted? Are we just seeing like a bounce back to the normal trend for those other percentage increases or decreases?
So this data is probably the first, what I would say, quote unquote, normative data that we're going to see. And you can see in this chart that I'm showing here, the total students with disabilities enrollment, you would see a dip during that period of time because a number of students were not provided their assessments timely, they were not identified timely, or provided services timely. That was a statewide issue that we had in California. And not just in California. Every state I talked to had that issue. But I think this data that you're seeing here is probably the first year of like actual data where we're seeing the impacts of that. What will be interesting is when the assessment data comes out in December to compare, because we had assessment data in from the 21-22 school year, but that was heavily impacted by some of the COVID learning impacts. It's going to be interesting to see have LEAs been able to use some of their American Recovery Plan dollars and their learning recovery dollars to address those impacts to identify student outcomes. So I don't know how much the impact is yet, but stay tuned. It will be coming.
Just a clarification, are students with 504s included in this graph and in like the data in general, or is there like a separate set of data for 504 plans?
So students who, this is only students who are represented under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that does not include students who are represented under the American with Disabilities Act, Section 504.
Thank you. You're welcome. And one last question. So on this slide for the last indicator, or second to last, number 16, mediation, what does that refer to? It's on slide number 16. The indicator is 16.
Oh, mediation. So so indicators 15 and 16 are about dispute resolution. So when there is a dispute that exists between LEAs and parents, then we encourage them to resolve those disputes in a number of ways. One would be to hold a resolution session to see if they can identify some common ground. The next would be what's known as a mediation, in which they'd have a mediator try and work out their differences. If either of those fails, then they can go to something like an Office of Administrative Hearings, administrative law judge to make the determination. But we try to avoid those, and we try to encourage LEAs to find alternatives to disputes.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
First off, I just want to say thank you for coming in and giving this presentation. And also thank you for being so honest about how California is doing. Like, this is like the one presentation that's actually giving actual evidence, actual stats, and someone who's being very honest with me and not ramping over the same thing over and over again. But I'm glad that the CDE is recognizing these concerns and issues with students with disabilities are facing in California, because this is the concern. And I know someone in the past told me this quote, that we can only accept the facts and we can't edit or erase it. And I'm glad we are recognizing this. So one of the main question that I have, I'm very passionate about students who are incarcerated in California, and it's my job to represent them. And I'm just curious, how many youth with disabilities are in juveniles? Is that in this data?
So these students are included in that data. So students there's two types of juvenile programs in the state. Well, there were up until July 1st. The vast majority of students who are considered incarcerated are often in our juvenile court schools. So those are students who are in juvenile hall or juvenile probation, and they're attending a court or community school to support them. Those students are identified here. There's also students up until July 1st who were served at the Department of Juvenile Justice through the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitations. Those programs have since closed, but their data would also be represented here.
Okay, great. And another question is, so what is the percent, like two things I do want to ask is what is the percentage of students who are getting services in juvies? But also, do you know how much money is given to juveniles in California for services? Because I was reading an article, I think yesterday or today, it said that 60% of students have disabilities in juveniles, and that is a large percentage. And what you're telling me now, that's great. I would also request, like later on when we have meetings, I would love it if we have also other data too about juveniles, what's happening, because I think it's important too, and I want to make sure that all students are getting the services, their free education, like our act says, and yeah.
So one thing I will tell you is that the LEAs for where their home is. So, for example, if a student lives in Davis, California, and then they come to Sacramento and they get arrested and then they're in the Sacramento Juvenile Hall, it's still the responsibility of the Davis Unified School District to support them and provide them services and to make that continuation happen. Now, the Sacramento County Office of Education still supports them while they're in the juvenile setting. What I will say you is it's an extraordinarily transient population. And so oftentimes students who are in juvenile programs are often only there 6 months or less. And so that is kind of a disruption. What we've also found through some work that the LA County Office of Education has done through their court and community schools is that the children often come there and they don't often recognize that they're on IEPs or that they have IEPs. And so they've really worked to help ask questions like, have you ever been in a meeting with your parents there in the school talking about what they can help you with as a way to identify children who have IEPs. So I think that there's work to be done there, but yes, there is that information. It's just, it's not often when we're talking about the data, there's a little bit more transiency in there.
Because I know that I'm aware that the state does give money, of course, to each district in each of these programs. I do want to know that because I know that people have said to me, of course the state is going to give you money for this, but I want to know that if our districts and like our prisons and stuff, are they using that? So do you know like if you can just give me an estimate, or it's okay if you don't know.
I'm not going to be able to speak to that, unfortunately. I'm happy at some point to have a larger discussion about it, but yeah, I can't speak to the individual costs.
Okay, Commissioner Topalian.
Again, thank you so much for this presentation. And along the same lines, I'm just wondering, I know the virtual academies are part of this, are part of the LEAs and what you represented, I believe. But I'm just also wondering if we could also look at some of the percentage of students who are in virtual academies, because at times some schools may decide to put students in virtual academies with special needs as opposed to sending them to RTC or doing any of those things or MPSs. So I just wonder if there is a place to capture that in the future, the virtual academy data.
I mean, it's not part of this current presentation. The data is represented inside of here, but it's definitely something to talk about in the future, about some presentation in that space.
Thanks.
Commissioner Estes.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. It is impressive and a lot I know. I was just touching back on this. I love the slide that you showed where you have the overlap between special education identification and our cross-system youth, and also students who have who are facing socioeconomic challenges. And I'm just wondering, in the root cause analysis, do you know if that's part of the root cause analysis? And then is there a shared improvement plan with other agencies like OYCR is now holding the reform for the juvenile justice youth? And there's a lot of overlap between the agencies and frankly, they're both impacting whether youth are meeting these.
So the most direct answer is no. But I think one of the things that we've been working here at CDE is to try and get our own individual house in order because we have differentiated assistance and LCFF kind of happening. And then we also have requirements in special education. And so we've been working for most of this year on an IDA addendum that will happen to the LCAP that will assist LEAs in bringing in some of the work that they've been doing on planning into their LCAP addendum. so that there will be a connection. The timeline is a tough one because the timeline for LCAP is really tough versus how we do our improvement work. But I would say first we got to get that done so that we have one single process or one at least set of work. We're just not there yet. And then definitely looking at some of the other outside agencies. We do work very closely with the Department of Rehab through their workability program, through their there's another acronym I can't quite remember, but we do work a lot with them, with the Department of Social Services and with the Department of Developmental Services. So there is some cross-agency work there, but some of the other work is still, I think, not yet there. Thanks.
So I want to thank the commissioners for all of your comment and input. And Shiloh, thank you so much for the information. And oh, I'm sorry. Oh, please, Commissioner Liu.
Hi, you mentioned earlier that a lot of the numbers are because of the LEAs and not utilizing as much help. I was just wondering what the percentage of I'm really cold. LEAs are utilizing the CalTANs. Wow, I'm really shaking.
Oh, you mean that? We have to find you a place that's not under the vent. So I will say, I think we are making it, we're going to start pushing a lot of LEAs there, right? Because that's where they're going to be able to access technical assistance. So it's been sort of a thing like, hey, would you like to access this? Now, through our monitoring work, we're going to say, here's where you access this. And so I do think more LEAs are going to be accessed, and we're going to be pairing LEAs to technical assistance. So the choice for some LEAs, not all, but some LEAs will be limited in the technical assistance that they can access. They will have to access one of our approved technical assistance providers.
For the LEAs that don't utilize the service, do you have any idea why they're not doing so?
So oftentimes, they still are required to access some kind of technical assistance, but they can access any technical assistance they want to. So instead of us saying, so I like to, I've talked about this before, I like to give an analogy of our systems kind of like an integrated healthcare model. So our LEAs who are, say, in the ICU, they have cancer, they're going to go to our providers that are within network. They have to go there. They have to get assistance. Now, if the LEA just needs, like, you need to lose 10 pounds or, exercise more, they have to do that, but they can choose to join a gym or walk or those kinds of things. They still have to report to us what technical assistance that they utilize, but we provide a little bit less requirement on it. And that's something that's actually structured within the law, that flexibility.
I see.
Again, thank you, commissioners, for your insightful comments and questions. And Shiloh, I always appreciate hearing the APR, but I do want to call you out for making me not feel young, because when you talk about when you started, and I think before that, it's like, wow, it's been a while. And I just want to, since this is a performance report, I would just think thinking of the Stockdale paradox, which is essentially you must confront the brutal facts without losing hope. And so when we look at a performance report that has 27 targets and we're meeting roughly 5 out of 27, when you count, the sub-targets, like, we just need to ground in that. And many of the data points that are not available yet because of the system, just making assumptions about the historical performance and level of compliance in those areas, it's probably very unlikely that we have exceeded the target right now. And so while these are the federal standards, and we need to submit the report, and we are moving to an action. One of the first lessons that I was taught in special ed is there are the federal standards, and then there are the standards that we set as a state and locally that can go beyond the federal measures and standards. And so I appreciate all of our recognition for a deeper conversation related to our data. And if we are going to have one system, I believe it's important that we begin modeling the practices across the system. And so in our Policy and Ledge Committee, I'd like us to have a conversation about, maybe expanding our priorities to, be more data focused as our LEAs are, so that we are really grounded in the patterns beyond the federal performance measures. And much like the LCAP, and the Local Control Accountability Plan and Formula, looking at a deeper level to disaggregate our data, looking at it by student groups, location type, so that we can be informed about bright spots, because we know there are a number of places that have been hard at work, and our results as like I'll say abysmal as they are right now, that does not reflect the quality of work that's happened and the level of focus and commitment of educators, just where we are in our improvement journey. And so as we, as a commission, use our platform to ask questions and to understand it may be informative locally, and certainly in our advice around priorities for areas of support or bodies of work that need to be highlighted. So as we are shaping our agenda and having consistent themes and conversations, I just want to highlight that we shouldn't just look at the APR results and then move on until next year, but continue to deepen our learning and understanding and making connections across the system. And so with that, as we move into a motion, just seeking a motion to approve the APR report as it exists now for the state board review in January. I want to call out there's a timing issue, as Shiloh pointed out, that we will continue to work to resolve, but just the availability of data and the timing of the federal reports, we don't have a solution for right now. While we had previously talked about a December meeting, we don't have the luxury of virtual meetings now, and accommodating an in-person meeting with resources available, it just isn't feasible right now. So for the sake of time and to move on from this conversation to the next item, seeking a motion to approve the report based on the indicators that we're able to see today.
I would like to call a motion to pass.
Thank you. Motion to approve the report as we've seen today for state board action. Need a second?
A second.
Okay. Any discussion about the motion? Turn it over for the roll call.
Chair Tostin.
Let me pause 1 second.
I'm sorry, Chair Tostin, did we need to call public comment?
Do we call public comment before the motion?
I'm not sure. I just wanted to make sure that. Okay, go ahead.
Let's put the slide up. No, better safe than sorry. So if you could post the slide, and I'll ask any members of the public in the room wishing to make comment on this agenda item to please line up. Seeing no members of the public in the room, I will close public comments in the room and just hold for about 30 seconds more for online public comments.
There's no callers.
Okay. There appear to be no callers, no public comments, so we'll close public comment on this item. We have a motion to approve the report based on the indicators we were able to review that has been moved and seconded, and so we will begin the roll call.
Chair Tostin. Vice Chair Graff.
Yes.
Commissioner Estes.
Yes.
Commissioner Liu. Commissioner Notch.
Yes.
Commissioner Snipes.
Yes.
Commissioner Sorter.
Yes.
Commissioner Wilkins.
Yes.
Commissioner Ding.
Yes.
Commissioner Tux-Jargle.
Yes.
The motion passes. Thank you again, Shiloh, for the presentation, and we look forward to our continued conversations.
Thank you so much.
Okay, the time is 10:52. Our next item starts at 11 o'clock, so we will be in recess until then.
I wanted to mention, she didn't call me, so just for the record, I say yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Lopez. Or is that
Thank you.
Commissioner Topolin?
Yes. I thought our votes don't. Right. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet.
No, so just since we're still online, commissioners who are attending online aren't a part of the official action, but we are recognizing the voice of all of the commissioners who participate. So while the vote is closed, we wanted to make sure to hear from your perspectives as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you all for sticking with us through the break. Before we begin our next presentation, I just want to highlight for any members of the public in the room, as well as those who are online, the annual report from the Advisory Commission on Special Ed is posted online, and there are physical copies in the room. And commissioners, please make sure you take some to disseminate through your networks as we leave today. With that, I would like to move into item 12, a presentation of an overview of the California Child and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative and where we stand in its current implementation. Thank you so much for both of you being here. We'll turn it over to you.
And county offices of education and school districts. Formerly with the county office in Placer, and before that with behavioral health and social services. And I am joined with.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Autumn Boylan. I'm a deputy director with the California Department of Healthcare Services, and my team oversees the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative, among other work that we're doing to serve children, youth, and families in the state. So happy to be here and to talk about this important initiative. Thank you.
So Autumn and I are going to work together in today's presentation. I'm going to start kind of with the meta view, 80,000-foot view, and then Autumn's going to drill down into some of the particulars about these amazing new opportunities we have for children, students, families, schools. That really helps, I believe, fundamentally change our ecosystem. We were just talking with Elizabeth Estes and said, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I never thought I'd see the opportunities that we have today under the Child Youth Behavioral Health Initiative. So that's us and our contact information. Okay, so the Child Youth Behavioral Health Initiative, or I'll refer to it as CYBHI, is a $4.7 billion initiative into California's children, 0 through 25 years old, from the state, with the idea of really transforming how we help support mental health services throughout the state for those individuals. Our focus, or the focus of CYBHI, is on promoting mental health, emotional, behavioral health, and well-being. And when I say that, think about our system previously was over here with very intensive services. We're trying to move upstream and do more prevention, or you'll hear Autumn refer to the services a lot as mild to moderate services, things like that. Providing these services and screening all of our children. How are all of our children doing? And built on a foundation of equity and accessibility. So we know that, hopefully, children are in school every day, and most children are. So thinking about the CYBHI as an opportunity to help create funding streams and sources and sustainability to offer services where children are is a game changer when it comes to equity and access to care. So it's a recognition that social emotional well-being and behavioral health impacts our ability to learn. We know that acutely from our time coming out of COVID, and I think if I'm not going to say there were any good outcomes from the pandemic, but it sure did reduce stigma around behavioral health and well-being, and increased our awareness of how we can support students and staff in school sites. The CYBHI focuses on the whole child, community schools, learning opportunities. So we want to combine all the education initiatives that are currently happening, and there's a few. Just to name a few there: community schools, CYBHI, pre-K, MTSS, which I presented on here a couple years ago, the Mental Health Student Services Act. And our hope is that the CYBHI isn't a thing that sits out here alone, but a blending of that work together, that CYBHI, the funding sources that you'll hear from Autumn momentarily, interweave into create a braid or a fabric to have stronger supports for children. Not that it's something else. Not on the topic today, but we are running a project, a demonstration project with San Bernardino County Office of Ed to integrate the CYBHI and community schools together. So what does integrated services look like with community schools on a school campus and within a district? Okay. So the initiative is really reimagining. So the governor's vision is to reimagine what integrated services and equitable services can look like on a school site. How can we reorientate the process and supports that we've had in place so far? Promoting mental health, emotional well-being for, again, all students. I think it's you know, the commission is aware that in the past, we had a system where children were in general education. If they needed additional supports, it was very, very, very hard to get it. And as those needs grew and grew and grew, then suddenly they're in special education. So think about CYBHI as an opportunity to enhance that continuum of supports or be part of our multi-tiered system of support in the state. Okay, so there's a lot in the CYBHI. I like this slide because it breaks it down into work streams and programmatic areas. So part of CYBHI, of the 20 some odd work streams that there are, is workforce training and capacity. So we want to build our workforce, build up training opportunities, build capacity. We want to change the ecosystem infrastructure, provide coverage. And I'd be lying if I said this wasn't my most excited part of the CYBHI that Autumn's going to talk about. And then really look at public awareness and stigma reduction campaigns, that we all have mental health. We all experience mental health and wellness along a continuum. And many, many of us experience trauma and the impact of trauma on us as educators, and being aware what students face related to trauma is critical importance. So of all those 20, we'd be here all day if I was going to talk about each and every one of them, so we're not going to do that, but we are going to talk about these 7 or so funding streams very briefly, and Autumn will go deeper. These are the educationally related work streams for the CYBHI. So looking at the all-payer fee schedule or the multi-payer fee schedule, behavioral health workforce investments, wellness coaches, building an infrastructure for schools to help support building capacity. Cal Hope, mindfulness and resilience, and so I'll go into those in a little more depth. So looking back at the work streams, and I'm going to skip over a few of these because I have the expert here, so I'll defer to her and she'll talk about some of these, so we're going to go fast through this part. Another very exciting opportunity under workforce training and capacity is something called wellness coaches. So a certified wellness coach is somebody who has an associate's degree or bachelor's degree in a related human services field that will be able to be on campus, be able to support students and staff, and also be part of the fee schedule. So currently, these individuals are called a lot of different things like student support practitioners, student assistants, mindfulness coaches. The names across the state vary, but a lot of their roles as we investigated this work were very similar. And much of those roles will show up on the fee schedule that Autumn's talking about. So currently, paid for MHSSA or other grants or other one-time funding, but now a portion of what they do will be paid for or be able to be paid for on the fee schedule. Trauma-informed services, educator training through the Office of the Surgeon General. I guess I get equally excited about all of them. I said I had a favorite. They're all my favorite. This is an opportunity to train every educator in the state for free on a program called Safe Spaces. It's a web-based learning platform that's available to help support educators really understand trauma, the impact of trauma, that behavior that shows up sometimes at school, whether it's escape behavior or shouting out behavior, is oftentimes related to trauma and the impact of trauma. So Safe Spaces is a great opportunity for educators. The SchoolLink Partnership Capacity Grants, Autumn's going to talk about that. I'm going to spend a second on the Student Behavioral Health Initiative, a project that I am impassioned about as well. This is an opportunity for school districts to partner with managed care networks. So the hospitals and companies that provide the mild to moderate Medi-Cal-related services. And there was a $360 million investment.
It's like 391.
$391 million investment in the Student Behavioral Health Initiative to support creating that connection between managed care plans and school districts. Where we didn't have a real great collaboration previously, one of the big outcomes of this initiative now has been our insurance providers for people with Medi-Cal really understand what we're doing in schools, and we understand the work they're doing. Most importantly, it also gave us a chance to create contracts with the managed care plans to perform those services that can be provided right on a school campus. I'm going to skip the multi-payer fee schedule because we're going to hear all about that in a moment, as well as capacity grants and CalHope. Mindfulness, resilience, and well-being. I think you're going to talk a little bit about that. And then the behavioral health virtual services platform. Coming soon, January 2024, we'll have a webinar on the platform in November, late November, after the Thanksgiving holiday, to really look at how do we bridge services and get families connected. Recently, I had a discussion with a superintendent, and he said, Michael, you need to understand, I'm the end of the road. I said, what do you mean? He goes, our school district is literally the end of the road in Kern County. It doesn't go any farther past us. It's just wilderness. And he said oftentimes, that road is closed. And I thought, wow, this is a great example about how the virtual services platform can connect a community that is sometimes literally disconnected because of floods and fire to services. His biggest problem is getting providers to his school district because it's a 3-hour drive from Bakersfield. So I'm very excited about virtual services platform, and I'm going to turn it over to Autumn to go much deeper in many of these topics.
Before I jump into the multi-payer fee schedule, I do just want to give a little bit more plug around the virtual services platform so you understand what this opportunity is. In January, we're launching 2 virtual services platforms. One of them will be available to serve parents and caregivers, as well as young children ages 0 to 12, to provide support to parents and caregivers who may be trying to help their young children deal with behavioral issues, emotional issues. It'll connect them to a live coach who can provide services around some goal-oriented action. So, for example, if there's tantrums happening or behavior issues, or the child is experiencing issues with their peer group at school, a coach will work with the parent and the child in a dyadic setting to be able to create some coping mechanisms, some strategies for dealing with those challenges. There will also be a ton of learning content, education, resources wellness exercises, peer communities, and care navigators to help get those families connected to community-based care, including school-based services. On the other side, we're launching a similar type of platform that will provide that same one-to-one coaching support, but for teens and young adults, so 13 to 25-year-olds. So that they, when they're in their room at night, stressed out about school, stressed out about their parents or whatever's got them spinning, they have somebody that they can turn to on demand to get that support and that they need to help work through whatever that issue is, so that they can get to school tomorrow morning and focus on learning and focus on all of the healthy things that we're doing in life, rather than spinning out and not being able to handle those circumstances on a daily basis. So I appreciate thank you so much for giving us a broad overview, but I really wanted to take just a moment to stress what these actually are and what this opportunity is. So I encourage you to join our webinar in November so you can hear more about it and hear from our partners who are going to be demonstrating a little bit about what those two programs will look like. One of the biggest opportunities, One of the biggest opportunities, as Mike said, available through the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative is to think through the way that schools are reimbursed for delivering mental health and substance use disorder services to students. So we have a lot of different things, and Mike showed you a page with 7 to 10 or so, we didn't count, work streams that are focused on expanding access to behavioral health and emotional supports for students in a school setting. The kind of overarching theme of these, and it fits very well with the community schools effort and many other initiatives that are happening, is the multi-payer fee schedule. I'm not going to show this video that's on the page. I'm going to talk through what's in the video, but it helps to hear it more than once, I will say. It's a complicated program, and there's a lot of moving pieces and parts to it. So we've included this video that we created as a messaging tool, as a communication resource, as a training ground for our LEA and County Office of Education partners who are actually going to be implementing this program to understand what it is. So it's about 15 minutes long. I encourage you to take a look at it. It's available there. It's also on our website if you lose track of it and you want to find it later. So what is the multi-payer fee schedule? In its most fundamental form, a fee schedule is a set of services that have associated codes and rates at the rates at which the health plans have to reimburse providers of those services. That doesn't mean a whole lot from a programmatic perspective. But from a programmatic perspective, what the fee schedule is actually a very significant opportunity to change the way that we reimburse schools for delivering services to students, specifically mental health, substance use disorder services, as well as those more upstream preventative emotional supports, wellness coaching, mindfulness activities, all of that you're doing today through the MTSS framework in all 3 tiers of the MTSS framework are services that are reimbursable under this new infrastructure. Today, there's a whole host of ways that schools are blending and braiding funding and putting pieces together. Many local education agencies participate in the existing local education agency billing option program, or LEA BOP, which is a very complicated, not well-loved program, but does provide Medi-Cal reimbursement for a host of services to students in schools, both for behavioral health services and for physical health services. It plays a very important role in terms of making sure that children in the Medi-Cal program are getting access to necessary services and supports. Most of what happens in LEA BOP today is around audiology and speech therapy services. All of that will continue into the future. So this program will still exist to offer those services to students. What we're specifically doing with the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative is saying that there's a better way to reimburse schools for mental health and substance use disorder services that are provided to students across that MTSS framework. So it creates a more sustainable funding mechanism, and it holds the health plans accountable for their current obligations to provide services to their enrolled members. all of the health plans, whether it's Medi-Cal or commercial payers, are required under federal law to provide the essential health benefits under the Affordable Care Act. That means that they are all required to provide medically necessary mental health services to their enrolled members of all ages. And so what this does is require under state law that those health plans reimburse schools when schools are the providers of those services to their members. It doesn't require the schools to have a contract with the plan. It doesn't require the schools to negotiate rates with the plan and do all of those complicated things about setting up those payer and provider relationships. We'll set the fee schedule, meaning we're saying here's the services that are reimbursable. Here are the codes that are tied to each of those services. Here's the list of rates that go with each of those codes. And here's the list of providers that are eligible, I should say practitioners, that are eligible to deliver services. That includes all of the PPS credentialed providers that are employed by schools and districts. It includes all of the mental health specialists that are employed by schools and districts. It also includes community-based organizations, county behavioral health departments, or other provider groups who are delivering services to students on behalf of the LEA or the school site. So if a school, as part of their community schools arrangements, for example, or a district has arrangements with community-based organizations to deliver SUD services or a wellness program in the school, all of those services are also reimbursable under this new reimbursement infrastructure that we're launching in January. So it's really meant to increase access to funding for services that you're already providing. And also from a very specific, I understand where we are today, lens around special education, it also means that a student doesn't have to have an individualized education plan in order to get the help that they need. Because this structure is available to all students in the school. There are some limitations in state law around the current obligations that schools have for special education. So the LEA BOT program will still be available to reimburse services that are on an IEP, but this means that all of the other kids, and our understanding from the research we've done is that about 10% of kids, although I did just hear that that number is growing, that 10% of the kids in the state have an individualized education plan. This means that the 90% that don't can also get access to care and support, while the 10% that do, or the whatever number we're growing towards, can still get the services and supports that you're delivering today through your LCFF funding, through whatever other special education funding sources you have through the IDEA, as well as through the LEA BOT program to pull down those federal dollars from the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So all of this is to say, like, this is going to make reimbursement easier. It's going to mean more money for school districts. It's going to be more money to provide services to students, and it's less complicated than our existing local education agency billing option program. The statute is on these next couple of pages, really just requires the Department of Healthcare Services, which is my department, to establish and maintain this fee schedule and establish all of the rates. It will include services across a wide array of service categories, including psychoeducation services for students, groups, and families. It'll include screening and assessment for all behavioral health issues. It'll include therapy services, so specific counseling services for individuals, for groups, and for families can be reimbursed through this infrastructure. It'll include some peer support or community health worker supports, so that you can have folks like the coaches that Mike talked about earlier also delivering support, as well as reimbursement for some of the care coordination activities that we know districts are taking on today. That districts are helping families, especially through community schools, but we know that this happens outside of that structure too. Helping kids get connected to food supports, housing supports, community resources, and social services. And this will provide some ability for schools to get reimbursed for making those connections. It'll also provide some reimbursement for your coordination of services teams or cost teams to be able to come together in that multidisciplinary team environment and be able to get reimbursed for those consultations that are happening around how we manage care for a child in a team-based setting. This is kind of the broad list of services. At the end of this month, we're going to be releasing the specific service and code list. We are still working on the very specific rate schedule. But the good news about the rates is that, I will say, the bad news about the rates is that they're Medi-Cal rates. Everybody knows that Medi-Cal rates are what they are. I'm not going to comment on that, but they are Medi-Cal rates. The good news about it, though, is that as a separate effort in the Department of Healthcare Services, we're increasing some of those Medi-Cal rates as part of a set of targeted rate increases that we're implementing across the department and across delivery systems. And so the rates are going to be a little higher than they are today. They'll be a little better in terms of the cost net benefit for school districts who are currently participating in the LEA BOP program. You'll get to keep more of the dollars. You know, but it's not going to solve all of the problems of all of the needs by having this one single rate. But what it does do is provide more funding, more federal dollars, and a more steady stream of sustainable funding over time. The health plans aren't going away. Their obligations aren't going away. So this is not a grant. This is not one-time funding. This is forever funding for school-based behavioral health services. The statute also requires the Department of Healthcare Services to establish the provider network. So we will set the parameters as part of our policy guide about who gets to be included. And right now, local education agencies across the state are being considered for the first cohort, which launches in January. We released a readiness review process and package. LEAs were required to submit a response by October 6th, and my team is busy back at the office trying to figure out if the LEAs that submitted their packages for consideration meet those minimum requirements for go live for the January cohort. So the readiness process is part of establishing that network. The other part of it is making sure that we understand who all gets included from the LEA perspective. So the way that the statute defines the school site is that it's at a location that where a public school or public school district is providing or arranging for the provision of services to a student. This includes county offices of education who are providing services to students, so the statute doesn't say that, but it does. This is where we kind of also get those community-based providers who are working with schools who also get to participate. And that includes services that are provided on campus, as well as services that are provided off campus. So if you send a kid to a youth drop-in center down the street and they're getting services at the youth drop-in center, then that youth drop-in center can also get reimbursed through this infrastructure. This is I'm not going to go through this but in too much detail, but I'll say this is just a kind of process map that shows that you enroll in the network, you provide the services, you submit the claim for reimbursement, and the relevant payer, so the health plan, has to reimburse for those services, and then the state will monitor all of that. The fee schedule, and Mike talked about this a little bit, intersects with other existing programs. It intersects with the local education agency billing option program, and it's kind of a parallel effort. So you can't do both. So you can't submit a claim under the LEA BOP program and a claim under the fee schedule for the same service for the same student at the same time. It also is parallel to, but integrates very well with MTSS and PBIS, the Positive Behavior Intervention and Supports, as well as the Community Schools Initiative. And we're really thinking about, through the California Health and Human Services Agency and some of the work Mike and Melissa Stafford-Jones are doing, how these programs really complement each other, because they definitely do. So we're doing some work to help provide some guidance on that front. But it does, on the left-hand side, you see how it kind of fits in the middle of this stack of services that are available. So the statute very specifically says that the fee schedule cannot be used to supplant school districts or schools' existing obligations under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, which means that services that are on an IEP are not reimbursable through this infrastructure. But you can reimburse those services through the local education agency billing option program to pull down the federal dollars. And you can get reimbursement for all of those other 90% of the students who don't have services on an IEP. And for those students with an IEP, They may have needs that are not on the IEP, and those services can also get reimbursed through the fee schedule infrastructure. It's complicated. We have to figure out how we know if a child has an IEP. You know, but we don't know, and we have to do the matching. So we have to figure out that piece of it. So we're still trying to figure some of the details about how all of this will work. And our first cohort that launches in January is going to be a learning cohort. So we're going to lean on our LEA partners and our County Office of Education partners and our experts, like some of you, to help us figure some of these things out in the first 6 months of the program, because we don't know the answers to everything that we need to know the answers to before everybody goes live in January of 2025. It also stacks underneath specialty mental health services, and many LEAs contract with county behavioral health departments to deliver specialty mental health services to students, though that's out of scope of what we're providing here. So if you're providing more intensive services to students as part of a contract with the county behavioral health department, those services would still get paid by the county behavioral health department and not through this fee schedule infrastructure. It also is in the stack, and enhanced care management is out of scope. So I don't know if you're familiar with the new enhanced care management benefit that launched in the Medi-Cal program last year, but it's a Medi-Cal care management program. The Medi-Cal managed care plans are required to provide enhanced care management to individuals with high level of needs, and there's a whole framework around enhanced care management for children and youth. That would be schools would be great providers of enhanced care management or ECM services, but those would require a contract with a Medi-Cal plan in order to be reimbursed and not available through the fee schedule. So some care management services are reimbursable, but not kind of those intensive case management supports. Those are really the obligation of our Medi-Cal plans, and we want to make sure that they're upholding their obligations. This slide, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but I do want to give a plug. And the video that I linked in the beginning does a really good job, I think, of explaining the difference between this program and the school-based Medi-Cal activities, Administrative Activities Program, or ESMA, as well as the Local Education Agency Billing Option Program. Those two programs are existing Medi-Cal programs. The MA program is available to support schools and districts for helping kids get enrolled in Medi-Cal. You can be participating in the MA program and the fee schedule because they're different activities. The fee schedule is services. The MA program is those administrative activities to help kids who need to be connected to Medi-Cal supports, to get them connected to those Medi-Cal supports, and you can continue to get reimbursed through the MA program. I've already talked a little bit about the intersection of the Local Education Agency Billing Option Program and the fee schedule. One important thing to note, though, is the LEA BOP program is a Certified Public Expenditures program, so is the MA program, which means that there are specific requirements around how services are paid. There's an interim rate, and there's a cost settlement process because it's a cost-based reimbursement methodology, which means if you get paid an interim rate of $100 to provide a service, but it only costs you $60 and you have to do all of your cost reporting to provide that service, the state will take back $40. If we paid you $100 and actually cost you $140, we owe you $40. But that cost settlement process causes a lot of frustration and confusion. There's also, the auditing that goes with that. And that cost settlement process, unfortunately, happens many times years later. So you don't remember that you owe $40. It comes out of a budget 4 years from now, and it feels like like a punishment. It's not a punishment. It's a payback for money that you didn't actually spend, but that's a confusing process. The fee schedule is not that. It's a straight fee for service rate. If the rate is $100, you get $100, end of story, period. No interim rates, no cost settlement, doesn't matter how much it costs. If it costs you $300, sorry about that, you get one. But if it costs you $20, you get $100. You get to keep the full amount in the fee schedule. And that's an important distinction between those two programs. We are phasing in the fee schedule. We have cohort 1, I already talked about that a little bit. We're reviewing the applications for that now. Those will be our early adopters. We'll get with those LEAs, county offices of education, our Medi-Cal plans, our commercial players, all of the parties involved will work out how to make this work for everybody, because there's still a lot. This is the most complicated thing I've ever worked on in my entire career. It's like a million balls of Christmas lights that you're trying to untangle and figure out how you get to the ends, and you never do, so you end up throwing them out and doing something else. We're not going to throw it out. We're going to keep doing this, but it's super complicated. And so we're going to go live in January and not have all of the answers. We have some of the answers. We have some ideas. We have some hypotheses, but we're going to test those, make sure it's sound, and then we'll expand in July of 2024 with additional LEAs, as well as to expand to the California community colleges, because this does also apply to the California community colleges, CSU, and UC systems. And then in January of 2025, and on a rolling basis thereafter, we will go live with everybody. There will always be a readiness review process, though. And so at any point, there will be this process where we'll need to make sure that LEAs have the infrastructure in place in order to be able to go live. Kind of already talked about this a little bit, but I will say that we have 65 local education agencies and or county offices of education who are in contention or under consideration for the first cohort. That's how many submitted their readiness package on October 6th. We did survey all county offices of education in all 58 counties to get input on who should be included in that first cohort. There are some minimum requirements, so all of the participating LEAs now and forever after will have to be Medi-Cal enrolled in order to participate, because that's the only way you get federal funding from the Medi-Cal program. So we started with those that are Medi-Cal enrolled. We asked counties to also consider whether the LEA is participating in the SB-HIP program and the Student Behavioral Health Incentive Program that Mike talked about. And we came back with a list. There were 140 LEAs on the list of potentials, and 65 applied to be considered. These are the factors in the readiness review that we're looking at, and I think this is pretty much where I'll start to wrap it up. But we're looking at Medi-Cal enrollment, whether the LEA has service delivery infrastructure or capacity building infrastructure, data collection systems or documentation systems in place to be able to collect, store, and transmit data appropriately in accordance with FERPA and HIPAA as applicable, and billing infrastructure. One more thing I'll say about the data collection and documentation in HIPAA FERPA. It's complicated. There's joint federal guidance by the Health and Human Services Agency at the federal level and the Federal Department of Education. Very good joint guidance, actually, that gives some very clear scenarios about this is the circumstance where HIPAA applies, this is the circumstance where FERPA applies. We have a work group that we're just launching with the California Health and Human Services Agency taking the lead with a vendor partner who's going to help create some scenarios, some mapping, some clear guidance about, in this particular case, this is the rule of the road, HIPAA or FERPA or both. We're also trying to make sure that we're very clearly understanding what HIPAA requires, what FERPA requires, and what the differences are between those two rules. And we'll be doing some other work around HIPAA and FERPA compliance down the road, but that's something that we're taking into consideration. This is kind of our launch timeline. We launch in January. It's going to be a soft launch. We're going to be learning. And then in February, we're starting all over with the readiness review process for those LEAs that want to be considered for cohort 2. Last plug, and then I'll wrap up. I know we have more stuff in the deck, but I want to make sure we have time for questions. We have $550 million in grants, grant funding that still needs to be distributed. We are partnering with the Sacramento County Office of Education jointly with the Santa Clara County Office of Education to disseminate the $400 million that are available for K through 12 LEAs and grants through all 58 county offices of education. So we are contracting with Sacramento and Santa Clara. They will disseminate the dollars to every other county, but there will be dollars available for all 58 counties to help build the necessary operational infrastructure that it will take to lift up this fee schedule program that I've been talking about. There's some other things that they can spend the dollars on, especially if they already have the infrastructure in place. And some of that is in the slides, but I won't go into details about that. The last thing, I know I keep saying last thing. We have two other programs, the CalHOPE Student Support and the mindfulness, resilience, and well-being grants. These are programs that support social and emotional learning for students in schools, wellness programs, mindfulness programs, communities of practice for educators across the state, for school staff across the state to come together and build out the necessary infrastructure, expertise, and knowledge about social and emotional learning and the importance of building out that infrastructure. So lots of work being done in this space in all 58 counties through these two programs, and happy to answer questions or talk more about that. I'm going to stop there, let you guys ask questions if you have them.
For real.
Yeah.
So, Michael and Autumn, I get why you're excited. Like, this is phenomenal, and for those of us who can, talk about AB 3632, we're a very long way away from that. And Michael, I appreciate how you illuminated the needs in our small rural, harder to access locales throughout the state, because as the superintendent said, being at the end of the road, whether you are in Kern County, Del Norte, Lassen, Modoc, the lack of resources doesn't reflect the commitment of the educators, and so the access that this provides, and I appreciate the highlighting the wellness component as we are continuing to reduce the stigma related to mental health. I mean, I can hope one day it's as common as, I went to the dentist. I took care of the main muscle in my body that keeps everything working, and so the access that these programs provide and the clarity are greatly appreciated. And I also want to just call out, Autumn, the appreciation for your transparency on, like, there's a bunch of stuff to figure out. And so, like, reducing the tension and anxiety that we're going to start with everything figured out, and the invitation to partner, very much appreciated from, just speaking for educators, in how we coordinate this and how we learn together. So very much appreciate all the details that you provided. We'll open up for comments and questions from commissioners.
Hi there. My name is Saram. I'm also one of the youth commissioners, and let me just say right now, that was an amazing presentation. Like, I love your enthusiasm. Now you are making me feel like that and telling California that actually mental health and services and healthcare is a basic human right, and thank you for advocating for that. One of my things that I'm going to ask right now is, okay, let's say that there are there's homeless youth, they have disabilities, and let's say they're incarcerated in prisons as well. What about them? What happens if they don't have money for insurance? Like, I'm reading an article right now, actually from the state. It says that juveniles living in public institution is not eligible for Medi-Cal benefits during the period of incarceration. If students want this quality of healthcare, what do we do? What are you guys going to do? Are you going to access them or what?
Great. Thank you so much for your question. Really great question, actually, a really important question. What do we do about those students who aren't covered by Medi-Cal programs or commercial insurance? We're definitely thinking about that. To think about, how do we build this system of support that really serves all students? So a lot of the work that we're doing, including those that are on the screen right now around the SEL program, social emotional learning programs, are for all students. We also think, by the way, that having this flow of funds for what is most of the population in the state of California through the multi-payer fee schedule will free up dollars that schools currently are using to provide services, because now you're not having to pay the non-federal share for services that are provided to Medi-Cal students. You're not having to use all of the LCFF funds that are available in each district to provide services to students. So some of those dollars could be shifted to provide services to students who are not covered under insurance or not covered as one of the populations that are under the fee schedule structure. However, I will also say, on your specific question about the justice-involved youth, earlier in my introduction, I gave an overview and I said, I'm working on this initiative and some other things, and I kind of brushed over what those other things are. My team is also responsible for leading the CalAIM Justice-Involved Initiative, which is a new initiative as part of our Medi-Cal program in our 1115 waiver, which waives a federal rule called the Medicaid Inmate Exclusion Rule, which forever has prohibited the use of Medicaid funding for individuals in jails, prisons, and youth correctional facilities. There's been a tide change at the federal level And California last January was the first state in the nation to get approval from the federal government for a waiver of that rule. So starting next year in 2024, we will be launching a program to provide services to individuals in youth correctional facilities, in jails for the adult population, as well as in prison settings, to provide a targeted set of services, including mental health services and substance use disorder services, including care management and linkages to behavioral health services once the individual is released, to make sure that we can build that bridge to help people in that 90-day period prior to their release, that they're getting the support that they need to get stabilized, they're getting the support that they need to get connected to care in the community, and those transition supports are happening so that they're set up for success once they leave that correctional facility institution. So absolutely a need, and a lot of work is just about to happen in that space.
Your following comment and question, I'm so happy right now. You're making me feel so happy and feel so proud for California right now. This is something we definitely need. And you're right, it does say that Medi-Cal starting in 2024. Woo! And I guess one last question is, I know that this is an amazing idea and we need this. It's just that a lot of people do not know about this. I know that a lot of families in my community, we are struggling to find quality health care because, to be honest with you, not everywhere in California gives you quality health care and special mental health services. And I would love to say that I would love to work on this and be part of your liaison or something. And I would love to work with my district and work with schools on this. So count me on this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think we do have some work to do on the campaign front. These initiatives we talked about today are about to launch in January. We've been doing a pretty significant campaign with our county offices of education and local education agencies to build awareness and education about this fee schedule infrastructure that needs to trickle down to communities. We're also really thinking about the outreach strategy and how we get children, youth, and families to know about the work that we're doing related to those virtual services platforms, related to some of the programs that we're launching through the wellness and mindfulness grants, and on a host of fronts. So very much top of mind in terms of that campaign and how we leverage some of the work that our partners at the California Department of Public Health is doing around their awareness building campaign to get the word out that these opportunities are about to launch and be available.
Two different languages, right, between California HHS schools and then families, and how do we interpret that to be able to support the message and support the liaison in that's necessary to make all of these programs that Autumn's talking about really work. Is a large part of the effort.
Yeah.
Very much appreciate all of your enthusiasm and compassion for this. Just something from my experience in my district, it's been really amazing seeing over the past year. For example, my high school has been implementing the wellness room and other mental health services. And just as a community, we're so excited to see this focus shift to mental health for all students. One thing I think we want to encourage as we are disseminating all of this information and resources to districts is to really hear from the families and from the students themselves. What type of resources do they need? What is their feedback? What things do they find helpful? My district, the Fremont Union High School District, has done a really good job of soliciting this feedback directly from students. For example, asking them, is a wellness room helpful, first of all, and in what location? What is the format to get students to access that wellness room, etc. It's like these small details I think really matters. And when students are given the opportunity to give some feedback or give like their opinion or view, I feel like it's very empowering, and it's definitely a conversation. It makes it like a dialogue to helping everyone in the community. But thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. I'll just say we 100% agree with you. We've done a ton of work around youth engagement specifically, but also with parents and caregivers in the last 2 years. So that's actually where we started doing this work. We didn't do anything until we started talking to youth and families and parents and caregivers across the state. So we've met with over 1,000 stakeholders across the state in different forums, specifically over 300 youth. just for the work that my team is doing. We've had focus groups, we've done surveys with youth. We had an advisory group that we convened to help, of youth specifically, to help advise us on the design of the virtual services platforms that we're launching in January, as well as for school-based services. So we talked about all of that. We also engaged in focus groups with youth when we were selecting the vendor for the virtual services platform, so that they actually are the ones that informed the decision that we made. And through the California Health and Human Services Agency, there's actually a report that's available on their website that talks about some of the work that we as an initiative, so not just at DHCS, but all 5 departments and the California Health and Human Services Agency that are leading efforts around the CYBHI, the work that we've done to put youth at the center. And there's a report called Youth at the Center that talks about that. We also have a child, youth, and family engagement network that is really about like how do we get out into communities on a regular basis to make sure that children, youth, and families are part of the conversation and the design. That's the only way to reimagine, right? We have to actually listen to what young people are telling us they need, because if we listen, they will tell us and they know the answers. So we're doing a lot of that. I'll say I've been plugging youth engagement at every speaking event I've been going to, so I appreciate that. We've written it into contracts that all of our vendors have to have a youth engagement strategy, that they have to have a youth advisory board, and that there's an ongoing commitment to engaging young people in this work. So we're very committed to that. Thank you for asking.
The HIPAA-FERPA work group that you heard about a few minutes ago, we're engaging with youth and families regarding that work because the release and negotiation of information and data is so important. Yeah. We couldn't do that without engaging with youth.
I just want to say thank you for coming. Building the bridge is so extraordinarily important between here and the work that you're doing. And I know you'll be at the symposium and you will as well. So there will be an opportunity for more connection and discussion. And I suspect we could spend all day talking about questions on this. So anyway, at the symposium in November, there will be an opportunity to do more of that. But anyway, just thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much. If you have questions, our contact information's on the slides. You can also email me directly. Happy to get your emails. Also, you're going to think, what did we hear? That's why the video is there. Yeah. So if you watch the video later, it'll reinforce some of the things that we talked about, because I know we covered a lot of ground in a very short amount of time. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you. And so if I can ask for the slide for public comment and ask for any public commenters in the room who would like to make comment to please begin lining up. And again, thank you so much. This is kind of earth-changing in terms of what it means for systems connection, and when you talk about HIPAA and FERPA, just trying to navigate that, and I know that my experience was a barrier for LEAs trying to move towards vendorization or to access certain pots of funds, and so the simplified approach and the payment schedule, I think, reflects decades of listening and understanding that has led to these significant improvements. So thank you again. Right. Seeing no public comments in the room, I will close public comment in the room and pause for any online commenters.
There are no calls waiting.
There are no calls waiting, so we will close public comment and we will transition into lunch. We will be on recess until 1 p.m. and then we will have general public comment and then proceed with the rest of our agenda. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. We are in the last portion of our two-day advisory council meeting. And so we wanted to, again, we're beta testing a portion of our meeting after lunch that's dedicated to hearing general public comment. So we wanted to share the slide for members of the public wishing to make comment online, and any members of the public in the room who wish to make comment, feel free to line up. We will hold this for a moment, and if we don't have any public comments, we'll close and then resume the rest of our agenda. For any members of the public who are monitoring during this portion of the agenda, we will be efficient with our time since we don't have any external presentations, and so the times indicated on the agenda may not hold true through the remainder of the meeting. Seeing no members of the public in the room, we will close public comment in the room and hold an additional 30 seconds just in case anyone's dialing in.
There's no callers.
Okay. We will close public comment at this time and move into our next item, the Special Ed Director's Report. And Shiloh's sitting in for us.
Again, temporarily, I am sitting as the director. So first of all, I just wanted to, I'm also here on behalf of Sarah Neville Morgan, who wanted to extend her deep appreciation for the work that you all have done around the selection of the director, including yesterday's closed session, but also just a highlight of Chair Tostin's work to support the process of selecting the new director. I think it was important for us to have a variety of voices be able to speak to the experience that was necessary and identify the right candidate. So we would truly appreciate that. It is my understanding that Dr. Heenan will start the position in around late November, probably around November 20th. And so we will still sort of be in this interim period where I'm filling in a couple different hats for a little while longer, and then we'll transition over to Dr. Heenan as the director. Many of you know this is a difficult position to start, and so it is often trial by fire. And so I expect that her February meeting will be the first meeting that she is here and working with you all, although I'm sure she will work with Chair Tostin and Vice Chair Graff to build some parts of the agenda. And then moving into the budget season and all the work that's associated with that. So I know you all will be very kind and welcoming to her as she starts this new bit of work. There is a whole landscape that exists in both the state level work and the federal work that takes time to get used to. And so obviously we will continue to support her as she makes this transition. So I think that's really exciting. The updates that I have are going to be mostly focused on our resource leads that we have in place and who they are, and then some legislative highlights. The legislative session ended October 14th was the last day the governor could sign bills. So I have some bills that he has signed that I will kind of cover with you all. And if you have any questions on that. As I spoke about in the APR presentation, we recently reissued the Special Education Lead RFA. That wasn't that recent, it was almost a year ago, but we selected the grantees. A total of 7 were selected for a 5-year period. So between 2023 and 2028. They will be working on supporting LEAs in that space. I did want to cover who they were so you all can know who they are. We have a lead for doing universal design for learning, and that is Placer County Office of Education and Open Access, which I think many of you all are familiar with their work. So we're very excited there. We also have work that's happening in the EWIG, which is the Educational Workforce Investment Grant, which is also a UDL focus. So I think we are excited to see all the UDL work happening throughout the state that really supports learning for all students. And so continuing to see that work, I'm sure at some point you may want to have them come and speak about the work that they're doing around UDL. UDL was one of the larger spaces that LEAs identified as being an area for improvement through our monitoring work. We also had an IEP best practices lead, and that was awarded to East County and Santa Clara County SELPAs. East County SELPA is headed by an incredible individual, Heather DeFeed, who is probably maybe second only to one other person in the department around data. In terms of special education data and SACE data. It's not me anymore. It's not me anymore. We have a new, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but just the data knowledge that she's able to expand to the work that's happening in the state around IEPs, and then now building out our high quality IEP work. She's also part of the IEP work group that's happening, the template work group. And so really excited to have her voice, that voice of experience that exists in the state. We identified an alternative dispute resolution lead for the state. That was Ventura County and Tehama County combined together to create an alternative dispute resolution lead. If you remember in the 2020-2021 budget year, the legislature awarded $100 million to SELPAs to support alternative dispute resolution, and they did a lot of really amazing work. Ventura County and Tehama County were one of the leaders in that space. And so this is the next iteration. So now that the funding has ended, how do we really create a system of alternative dispute resolution that builds relationships among families and LEAs? So I think that's exciting to see that come together. We also have our English learner lead, which is out of Imperial County. That was one of our continuing leads. They were our English learner lead for the first round of funding, and now they are the permanent, not the permanent, but this round English language learner leads. And so I know they were referenced in the OPTEL presentation today, and they are sort of leading that charge around EL work, and the RELs, the regional English learner leads that are throughout the state. So excited to see that overlap kind of occur and see the next phase. As you may know, we had an English learner and students with disabilities pathway work that occurred. And so now what's the next iteration? What does the implementation of that look like? So continuing to make that a priority here in the state. We also had 3 capacity builder leads. And so one of them was continuing. They are our what was known as the SELPA Improvement Leads, SIL. And so we continued their work through El Dorado and Riverside County Offices of Education. And I think many of you all are familiar with their improvement work, but also their capacity building around what implementation science looks like, right? And I think that's part of the work that we talked about during the APR presentation, is that improvement work is not 1 year, it's not one time, it is ongoing. And so I think when we start to think about what moves the needle in California, it is about that implementation science work. And then we had 2 new capacity builder leads, one out of the Santa Clara Office of Education. It was interesting that you all have built a lot of your meeting around that sense of belonging, because that is kind of the work that this lead is doing around creating a sense of belonging for LEAs who want to work on inclusion work, but are more in our targeted category, meaning they have work to do, but how do they implement it independently? Versus the work like our Supporting Inclusive Practices program. I have jokingly referred to them as like our Grey's Anatomy team that like go all over the state and save lives. These, I mean, if you work with SIL, that's kind of what it feels, or SIP, that's kind of what it feels like. But the Santa Clara Office of Education is really about building up LEA work that they can independently implement, because not every LEA needs that level of intense intervention. And so how can we still build in inclusive practices without having like a one-to-one person exist with you all the time? And then we have the Los Angeles County Office of Education that was awarded as part of our capacity builders to build a sort of a lot of partnership around county offices of education and increasing inclusion practices. And so the first year of their work is really going to be focused on how do we create space to understand what that inclusion space looks like at a county office. And the reason I think this is important is because when we look at inclusive practices and how we look at data, and I'll always bring up the data piece for my work, because we have 10,000 schools in California, and I cannot look inside every classroom. So data is what we start with. When the problem is that data sometimes for those students in county offices gets lost inside a bigger set of data because the district of residence is not the county office for those students. Those students, their responsible entity is their district of residence. And so this is about when you have students at these county operated programs, what does that look like? What is the landscape? So they're starting with a state landscape of what that looks like, what are some of the best practices, and then building out resources to support how we can create more inclusive programs in county offices. Because those are oftentimes the students who have the most intensive support needs, and how do we create inclusion pathways for them? So I kind of want to spend a little bit of time just to talk about the resource leads and what that's going to look like. I think we're excited about that, this work. It will come, I think, the first 5 years, 6 years came really quickly, and I feel like these ones will also come quickly too, but excited to see what the space looks like. There are some highlights from the budget that I just kind of wanted to kind of highlight for you all. I don't think we brought them up in our last director's report. The Golden State Teacher Program, and I don't know if you all know this, but in the higher education chapter, the budget provided one-time $6 million in federal funds to support grants to teacher candidates enrolled in special education teacher preparation programs. And to teach at a high-need school site. So I think that's really exciting, this desire to be able to support work that's happening at the teacher preparation place. Because I know that's a place where we think about, we need more teachers, how do we create that space? So that's really exciting. And I know that the work that I worked recently with the U.S. Department of Education on a grant program to support PhD programs for administrators, just specifically in special education. And it's really exciting to see all the different programs around the country that are building out PhD programs so that we have leaders in special education, right? And I know this working with the special education leaderships in districts and in the SELPA organization is that it is a big challenge for schools and districts to find those leaders in special education. So what does a special education director look like? We are getting more and more special education directors that have a limited amount of special education experience. So what does that leadership pathway look like? So I know that's sort of a long story to say the Golden State Teacher Program is the start of that, and I think we can continue. I think that there's an appetite for even more. Just a quick note, the omnibus trailer bill also extended the moratorium on the creation of new single district SELPAs from 2024 to 2026. So I think we're still kind of figuring out what does the single district and what does the SELPA system look like that makes it really useful. The California Department of Education will support the SELPA work. We think it's important. There are simply too many LEAs for us to work on them one-on-one, and so having consortiums that exist work really well. What that looks like, I think, is still kind of coming, into picture. And then, and there was also the requirement to post each SELPA's annual local plan on the CDE website. So we're going to be working on that this year. That's going to be a new thing for us to kind of work through because a lot of those local plans are not 508 compliant, so we're going to have to work on making them that way. And so we'll keep you updated on that. The other thing I wanted to just kind of touch on with the trailer bill and the budget bill was the AB 181 work around our alternate pathways to a diploma, and that we published some guidance in July, some FAQs in July, and we're going to be continuing to update those FAQs to ensure that we are answering the questions that we have in the field. We can't always answer every question Some of these are more local decisions, but we do our best to try and answer all the questions that are associated with it. The budget bill did make some changes, and one of the biggest ones, I talked about it previously, was that students who are eligible for this pathway had to have been in 9th grade in 22-23. So, in 3 years will be the first year that students will be able to graduate with this alternate pathway of a diploma. And I think it's important. It gets the LEAs some space to get ready for this change, but also it gives our systems a little bit more time to make sure that we can collect the information and report it on identification, because part of the requirements in ESSA was that we have to report students who receive this alternate pathway. As I said, October 14th was the last day for the governor to approve bills. We always really get excited because then it feels like we can breathe for a minute before we enter the next budget legislative season, which starts in January. So that sometimes becomes a celebratory day. So a couple of bills I wanted to highlight was SB 531, which is the requirement for LEAs to LEA contractors to have background checks for work experience programs, and it modifies the education code that provides student safety while also facilitating business participation for students in work experience programs. He also signed SB 323, which is our comprehensive safety plan. It requires that disaster procedures include adaptations for pupils with disabilities and requires the annual evaluation of school safety plans to include plans to ensure that children with disabilities can be appropriately accommodated in the emergency plan. The bill also includes procedures for bringing concerns about pupils' ability to access safety procedures to the school principal. That was often a barrier because it would have to go up, like, to say the superintendent or the school board, but now those can come directly to the principal. Assembly Bill 1340, I think is probably really exciting for you all. We may not have been tracking that, but that one is the posting of graduation data, which doesn't sound that exciting right now, but many times I've come and presented the APR in front of you all, and there's been a woe of sadness that we weren't able to include 5- and 6-year graduates of the regular diploma in our federal rate. And although that has not changed, we are now able to publish on our website all students who receive both 5- and 6-year diplomas. So they took a little bit longer, but they were still able to get that regular diploma, which is exciting. So it also can be disaggregated by disability, and so we can really begin to see LEA by LEA, where we are having success and where we are continuing to struggle. And then AB 611 was the notice of certifications changes for non-public schools. This bill requires contracting LEAs or charter schools to send a notice to parents within 14 days of becoming aware of any change in the certification status of a non-public school. This was important because we often make certification changes to non-public schools for very important reasons, such as student safety, and it's important that parents are made aware of that, those changes. Even if nothing changes with the student's placement, that the parents know that they should have access to that information. And then I believe AB 723 was also passed. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that one. That states that a student who is in foster care, who is also in a non-public school, that remains their school of origin. And that's important because students who are in foster care often experience a lot of transition during changes in their residential status. And so we wanted to make sure that their school would stay consistent, even if their district changed. One other important thing to note about this bill, though, it does still require that if a student changes districts, that they are required to review the IEP to determine if the child can be served at the school. And I think that's important as well. So it creates a nice line for to continue services that are needed, but it also creates a space to ensure that when changes do happen, that the students' IEPs are reviewed. So that that seems like a lot of bills, but there were lots of bills this session. I think I felt like I reviewed like 500 bills, and then of course it comes down to the day, and there are never that many that come for governor's signature. But still an exciting session. I'm excited to see what the spring will bring in terms of the work that's going to be happening. So continue to keep you posted if anything else comes up. But the next person sitting in this chair will not be me, so it'll be Rachel. And so she'll be able to provide you lots of support and more information in the next session.
Thank you so much, Shiloh. We always appreciate the in-depth information and your flexibility as the department has seen changes over a number of years to fill in the spaces and provide the leadership that we require as a state. So thank you, Shiloh, for all of that. One of the pieces I just wanted to follow up on, obviously, there are the special ed leads, and I was reminded of when, not Bonnie, Nancy, our co-literacy director was with us yesterday and highlighted a number of the literacy programs, as well as, I believe, Mindy Fadig in our first meeting this year highlighted a number of programs all of the programs in the system of support. And so as we're learning and thinking about like our APR data and student outcome data, the programs within the system of support, within the special ed focus leads within the system of support, as well as the other program leads within the system of support, so that we continue to model and push towards the one system, so making sure that our learning is expansive about all of the programs and systems that are aligned for our students. Are becoming more and more aligned each day for our students. And so with that, open it up for any questions or commissioner feedback. Is there anyone online?
Oh, no, yes, April.
Okay.
April?
I have a question. I don't know if you could see me.
Not yet, but we can hear you, April. There you are.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I had a question about the alternative pathway in regards to, I think you made a comment that they have, students have had to have completed or had to have been in 9th grade during 2022 and 23. Did that mean have completed 9th grade by that time period? Or if you can elaborate a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, so they would have needed to start 9th grade that year. So not have completed, but would have completed at the end of the school year. So the 22-23 would have been year one of the cycle to start that process. So in essence, what that means, and these are some tough decisions. We had tons of conversation around this with the legislature as they were sort of making this determination, was that students who are, say, this is their senior year, their 12th grade year, would not currently be eligible for that pathway. But it gives students time to be enrolled in those classes that they need to take to get that the curriculum, to be able to make that progress. This kind of goes back to the discussion I had about the grad plan, some of those mental models that we still have to work with staff around. And so, yeah, so it's starting for students who were in 9th grade last year.
I'm sure I'm going to have more questions around that, but I don't want to take time because obviously it's a personal question that has to do with my daughter who graduated and 2 years ago and took all the classes. So I think I'm concerned how that affects her. For those who've taken all the classes they need to. And, I'm sure some are going to want to get grandfathered in. I don't even know if they use that word in these discussions, but
yeah, and under ESSA, students who do receive this alternate pathway to a diploma are still eligible for services and supports through transition through age 22. So, yes, And I'm happy to have that conversation with you, Commissioner Lopez.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for elaborating a little bit more on that.
Commissioner Oyakawa.
Thank you. I'm going to just continue that conversation. It doesn't affect my daughter, but it affects a lot of other students I know who have already left high school, but probably have already met all the requirements for this alternate diploma, even though except for the fact that they were not in that year by ninth grade or whatever that cutoff is. And so I guess I would also be very interested in seeing an attempt to try to grandfather in, whatever the term is now, these students, if it's something that can be done, because the services to 22 is great for a lot of these kids, or now young adults. The diploma would be very meaningful and helpful for them as they try to get jobs and so on. All the reasons that we're created alternate to begin with. The other question I had with regards to that is how the information is getting out about this opportunity, because I have met so many people who have not heard of this at all. And so I hope that we can get more information out to parents and schools about this new pathway, because I think it will benefit so many students. So I hope that is something that we can really push out, especially I guess this year is when it's really kind of coming to fruition. And then I just wanted to thank you for mentioning the, I'm sorry, which bill it was that passed with a notification about the non-public school placement changes, especially for the safety for our kids. But even if that is not the reason for the change, more information going to the parents who are affected is very much appreciated. So we're thankful for that. So thank you for all your updates. I'm going to miss having you with these in this role, but I know we'll keep getting more information from you. Thank you.
And I will say I do agree. I think we're doing more discussion about what does the communication aspect look like around this as well. I know that there's been a lot of communication, a lot of confusion about this and the AB 154 work, which is the alternate means of determining whether or not a student is meeting standards. It is I have joked that the legislature created an apple and a pear and then called them both blueberries. And so that has created a lot of confusion that we're having to work on. But I do believe we're going to be able to get out some information that's going to be really helpful to LEAs and the public soon about this issue to address a lot of the questions and concerns. I will say though, and for the record, we have heard from LEAs that do I need to create a new diploma or a different diploma? And the answer is no. So that's going to be one of the FAQs that's coming out. We do not need them to create anything new or do anything new for this. There is a little bit of a different way of coding it, but they can still give the diploma to the student as a regular diploma. There's some caveats there, but they do not need to create a separate diploma.
With that, I will ask for the slide for public comment to be displayed, and any members of the public in the room wishing to make public comment, please begin lining up now. Seeing no members of the public in the room lining up, we will close public comment in the room and hold for a moment just in case there are folks dialing in.
There are no callers.
Okay. We will close public comment on this item and move into our committee study sessions. And as we transition to committee study sessions, I believe two committees are meeting today, Legend Policy and Mental Health.
I just got some feedback that mental health is actually not on our agenda, so that
if you'd like to, by the power vested in me, we can update the agenda for mental health.
I mean, I'm just following, like, there was a process question.
No, so we're in our committee study time, and this is one of the areas that we'll talk about later today in trying to work out some of the kinks. We have some limitations in terms of space availability and also wanting to adhere to the rules around a study session. Additionally, since we have our study sessions happening concurrently, if I wanted to participate in the bylaws committee, that means I'm not able to participate in the mental health committee. And so wanted to put some thought to as we continue to refine our agenda and have experienced kind of this newer format in one cycle of the meeting. Any suggestions on how we might make the best use of our time on the second half of day 2 so that we have time to collaborate and have our study sessions on particular issues, but don't extend the meeting so that each study session is the full commission, which would create other challenges with Bagley-Keene. So for today, those are the two that we will plan to have conversations in terms of planning for future meeting agenda items and continuing past conversations. Unless there's any heartburn, how about we allocate 30 minutes for the study sessions? Then we will come back for committee report out and then move directly into agenda building and the close of our meeting for the day. All right, seeing consensus around the dais. And so we will be recessing for study session right now. And the committees will decide which side of the room, or can we use this side room as well? Or the side room is going to be most supportive of your conversations. Okay, mental health is called dibs on the side room. Meeting, leg, and policy will be in the main room.
And online commissioners?
Online commissioners, because of the limitations with the video, we won't be able to include online in the room because we won't have this feed available to us.
Excuse me, David? Yep. Last time we were in committee, we were able to bring in, just using our phones, just audio with some of the online commissioners, if that's something that people are interested in trying.
The technology exists. I don't think, would that? All right, so feel free to transition to the same Zoom feed on your phone to include commissioners who are online. We will not be able to have the public feed though, but we will have a complete report out after we resume. So thank you for that, Commissioner Oyakawa. And we will take a 30-minute break, or not break, we will go into committees for 30 minutes. Let's plan to be back at 2 o'clock. It's 1:34, so shorted you 5 minutes, but we'll be back at 2 o'clock and resume the meeting. Welcome back, everyone. We are just completing our study sessions, and I can affirm we studied during this session. There was great energy as we studied. And so now will be the opportunity for us to report out. Our Legend Policy Committee, as well as our Mental Health Committee, had great conversations, and so why don't we just go alphabetical order. Legend Policy, take the lead.
Thank you, and thank you to all of the commissioners who joined and gave such critically important and very helpful feedback. Our work today was updating the language of our disability equity rubric, which was originally adapted from the Racial Equity Impact Assessment Guide in 2009. So we wanted to broaden the language and update it to things that weren't included from 2009. So I apologize in advance. I'm going to do a lot of reading because this is something that is an action item that we would have to adopt, and you have to know what you're adopting. So here we go. We have the purpose of the rubric is to ensure that legislation and policy are constructed in a way that ensures equity of access, support, and outcomes for students with disabilities and intersectional identities. And there are I scrolled down 6 areas. The first is purpose. And then the bullets under purpose: how does the proposal ensure the educational inclusion and holistic development of all students, including those, that was one that I didn't update, including those with, sorry, let me start over. Okay. How does the proposal ensure the educational inclusion and holistic development of all members of disability communities and intersectional identities? My apologies, that is one edit that I missed from our discussion. The second bullet: will it actively mitigate disparities, discrimination, and any form of systemic biases within the educational framework? And the last bullet under purpose: how does it contribute to advancing the principles of equity, diversity, inclusion, and rightful presence? The second area is stakeholders. Which disability communities and intersectional identities may be most affected by and concerned with the issues related to this proposal? Have representatives from diverse disability communities and intersectional identities been proactively and meaningfully engaged in the development of this proposal? And how can the participation of underrepresented, underserved, and/or marginalized disability communities and intersectional identities be prioritized and authentically included? Section 3 is impact and alternatives. What potential negative impacts or unintended consequences could result from this policy, particularly for underrepresented, underserved, and/or marginalized disability communities and intersectional identities? Second bullet is, are there more comprehensive and effective strategies available to mitigate disparities and advance equity for members of disability communities and intersectional identities? And the last bullet is, how can the policy be adapted to ensure the promotion of positive impacts on equity, diversity, inclusion, and rightful presence? Section 4 only has one bullet. It's accessibility. How does the proposed policy contribute to individualized and barrier-free access to education for members of disability communities and intersectional identities? Section 5, what comprehensive and empowering support mechanisms and resources are available to members of disability communities and intersectional identities addressing their holistic educational needs? And then the second bullet is the proposed funding allocation not only sufficient, but also equitable, taking into account the specific needs of disability communities and intersectional identities? And then the last section is accountability. What are the specific success indicators and comprehensive progress benchmarks for evaluating the impact of the policy on members of disability communities and intersectional identities? How will the outcomes be comprehensively documented, assessed, and continuously reviewed, ensuring ongoing adjustments for the benefit of members of disability communities and intersectional identities? And lastly, how will the entities involved be held accountable for their responsibilities in ensuring equitable outcomes for members of disability communities and intersectional identities impacted by the proposal? So that's a lot of talking. But before I stop, I will share something that I should have started with, what is the purpose of the Disability Equity Rubric? If I could turn back time. So this is an internal document that we utilize. It was part of our strategic planning process to really think through how are we as a commission aligning our priorities, our conversations, what guide are we using? There's so many things that we could talk about and discuss, and I think this was what we had prior to our strategic planning process when we developed our priorities. And it was very helpful for Chair Tostin and I in version 1.0 of our Legend Policy Committee when looking at all of the different pieces of legislation that were introduced. We can't track them all.
And so this was a nice kind of rubric for us to go through and check ourselves and help guide our work. Now I will stop talking and turn it over to any other participants in Legend Policy Committee to ask questions, share their thoughts.
I think the one question that we had for everyone in regards to the language that we have in here is whether or not we all have a common understanding of the language. And one word in particular that we were thinking of is the word holistic, just to make sure that everyone here has a common understanding and feels like that's a word that we can use appropriately.
And we were specifically talking about whole child, so academic, behavioral, and social emotional. But it was a very great point that was brought up. If we don't have our common understanding, it's not going to help with alignment. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
I had a process question. I heard this is an action item?
I believe so, because if it's something that we're adopting.
I might suggest we use this as a first read.
Okay.
Have it prepared for a conversation review at our next meeting for adoption at our next meeting, so that everyone can see it. Yeah. Our commissioners who are not able to join us today also have an opportunity to kind of scan through it. And I wanted to just bring up, I mean, as we are all learning new ways and language through an equity lens, giving ourselves, and I had a conversation with a colleague about this, grace to continue to learn, because the pace at which we are learning the historical context of some words that we've always used, I think, outpaces, I know, my personal capacity at times. And so as we were developing documents, taking the time to be mindful, and I'll highlight an example that I believe a number of state agencies and public agencies are moving away from in terms of stakeholder, and moving into the use of educational partner or partner, and just to be mindful of all the communities of that. And so I think it supports our goals to take the time, share the document, have an opportunity to, have concerted review for adoption at our February meeting.
Commissioner Topalian has a comment.
Okay, if I could just make one more quick comment. And also, I know we've been very clear about, the limited capacity we have to track bills. And so as you were going through the points of, the strategic plan has been very helpful and supportive in agenda planning. And so as I was thinking of the presentations we've heard over the last 2 days, thinking of the bullets that are hit through our equity statement, and having that as part of the invitation to future presenters to consider how they might align the content to not only our strategic plan, but also speaking to how it furthers some of our goals related to increasing disparities and inequities.
Commissioner Topalian.
I just wanted to say thank you, Commissioner Tostin, for saying that just overall, because I was having a hard time following myself, and I was like, I need to see it visually, because just to be able to process it. So I appreciate you acknowledging that we all process things differently. So thank you.
Commissioner Estes.
Thank you. Just to add to that, as you were reading, I was thinking we've had presentations on accessibility of language, accessibility period, but accessibility of language also. And just thinking, reading that with the lens of some simplicity for understanding is just something that I was thinking about.
Commissioner Notch.
I appreciate that comment so much. And a question came up in our committee meeting about audience and is it an internal document? Is it outward facing? And how that would really guide the language. And I also appreciate that I can get this out to everyone for reading and best thoughts. I can't distribute it. I will send it to Shiloh. Is that?
Well, Denise.
To Denise. Okay. And I'll send it as a Word version, so feel free to make your own edits so that when we have discussion, not to send it back, right, but just
Yeah, so feel free to make notes on your copy for the conversation when we're all together.
that's what I meant. PDF seems permanent, and that's the opposite of what I want to suggest. So great, thank you. And thanks in advance, Denise.
Is that the end of the Legend Policy Report? Yeah, that's it. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions there. We'll transition to mental health.
Yes, we had a brief impromptu meeting. But we were able to touch on some of the priority areas that we have in the Mental Health Committee's strategic plan. One was to make sure that we have youth commissioners here and present in our mental health committees. So we did have that, and your input was amazing and so valued. So thank you for being there. More to come. We talked a little bit more about our goal of really discussing out-of-home, out-of-state placement for the children of California, many of whom are students with disabilities in various categories. And we know that there is the NPS-NPA study that's going to be conducted. And we were hoping that that study will include the monitoring of out-of-home placement for children out of state and who is doing that and how that's going for the children of California. So that was one piece of input that we had. And then the other was the potential of having a presentation by the Office of Youth and Community Restoration to the Commission on their work, because that is another body of reform in California for the juvenile justice children in California who would just come up today. And how are they thinking about, or how is that interfacing with services and supports for students with disabilities? And that's as far as we got, other than definitely wanting to follow the fee schedule and the CYBHI presentation that we had today and that work. Thank you.
I had a great time with this committee, and I think that what I brought up today in the meeting about questioning about incarcerated youth. So I think in our committee meeting, I was asking about a possible next time our meetings, whatever. It would be awesome if I could work with the Office of Youth Community Restoration and get a presentation from them, kind of seeing where are we in California. So I'm not looking a bunch of medias and research and contacting people, because I literally cannot contact a person whatsoever. So it would be awesome to have a presentation from them and see how we're doing and how incarcerated youth with disabilities are getting their services or not. But also contacting with more organizations regarding about displacement as well, making sure that we are following state protocols and making sure that we are going the right path and we're not backtracking or going backwards. That's what we talked about in our meeting as well.
Thank you.
There was one more thing. And I know that the NPS-NPA study is a longer term study, but having a presentation to the commission in advance of its development and finalization, just so we know the status and how the research is going and can give some input on it.
Okay. Any additional comments in the room or online? So I'll ask for the slide for public comment to be posted. I ask members of the public in the room wishing to make public comment to please line up. Seeing no members of the public in the room, we will close public comment in the room and hold an additional 30 seconds for the public comments online.
There are no callers.
All right, we will close public comment on this item and move into agenda building. And so as we move into agenda building, I've referenced a few times, we've modified the structure of our meeting from kind of our historical approach, and we'll continue to refine it this year. And so wanted to give everyone some context. When we start at 10 on day one, through our time in the afternoon on day two, all of our presentations are kind of chunked into 45-minute slots or blocks, with the intent being 25 to 30 minutes of presentation, 15 minutes of engagement, and public comment. And so with that approach, by my math, and Denise, I'll just be transparent, it's probably wrong. It appears we have space for roughly 7 to 8 presentations on day one, and on the morning of day two, up to 2 to 3 presentations. So if we consider the start of our meeting through the morning of day two, we have enough time for roughly 8 to 10-ish different presentations. And that's also allocating roughly an hour of time for commissioner reports, state board report, special ed director report, and special schools. So need to pencil it out a little bit more, but we have roughly enough time in a day and a half to receive lots of information, report out, and then after lunch on day two, still maintaining two spots for general public comment. What I would like to suggest in the afternoon is 2 30-minute sessions for committee study sessions, legend policy going first. Then on the second 30-minute block for study session would be operations and planning, because folks from legend policy and mental health participate in operations. And then there's another space for ad hoc committees. And so, for example, if we want to include and this is hypothetical, integrate comments from our equity rubric into the bylaws, or if we wanted to update the elections process, we could have time for ad hoc bylaw committee meeting during that same time. And so that would take us roughly from 1 o'clock-ish to 2 o'clock, allow for committee report out, agenda building, and ideally we are adjourning the meeting by anywhere between 2:45 to 3 o'clock, because I want to be sensitive to those who travel. And again, we're here for a very long time, and my mind only has so much capacity to take information in and engage. And so wanted to just kind of share that, and again, we'll keep refining it and have agenda templates for everyone to respond to at the next meeting. But does that conceptually seem like it might work for our time together? Just thinking about how the time, it's been a little bit unique this meeting because we had a closed session and moved some things around. But overall, does that feel like a good flow for us? Yeah. Seeing consensus around the dais. Anyone online want to provide any input or different perspective?
Sounds good. Commissioner Reese says, I think that this will work. This is a winning formula.
All right. Well, it'll be our best first attempt, and we'll keep refining it over time. And so with that, as we move into agenda building, and as we are building the agenda, my vision for us as a commission is that this becomes more of a collaborative process. I can assure you there's lots of work that goes on behind the scenes to make the meeting come together. And so as we move into February, I would like to draw everyone's attention to the document in the virtual folder that has the important ACSE deadline dates for presentations. And so as you are thinking of potential meeting topics, and I recognize we may need to identify points of contact and who will do the outreach, but the agenda posting deadline for our February meeting, cycle of meetings that take place on February 20th and 21st and 22nd, in that time range. I don't have my notes right now. Later in February, the agenda posting deadline is February 9th. We need all the presentations submitted by February 2nd. And the details of the title of the presentation, and then a 2 to 3 sentence summary of the presentation, and understanding if the presenters will be here virtually or in person. And so that's all of the information we would need by February 2nd, because that allows for a turnaround to make sure the agenda is posted and we have all the documents in the virtual folder, as well as it gives some opportunity for back and forth with the presenters to ensure that we're meeting all the accessibility standards for the presentation. So as we go into February, some of the topics that are under consideration, as I've kept a running list, some are standard conversations for our February meeting. The governor's budget is going to be released sometime around January 15, and so February would be a good time for us to have a summary of what is included in the education budget, as well as an update on any bills that align with, again, our priorities areas. And so we would ask whoever provides that presentation to maybe focus in, because I think we can anticipate a heavy legislative session, and so a highlight of some bills that are in the world. And so that's 2 slots that are filled. We've already talked about continuing our conversation related to data and understanding how the data looks when it's displayed differently, and as we look at different student groups and the results. And we'll have the complete set of the annual performance data in February, as well as the release of the dashboard data for our consideration. So again, if we have about 10 slots, that's 3. Also on the list, we talked yesterday with the Swift Institute, and they shared work that's taking place in Orange County and Oakland. We also had a suggestion for, we've not had a conversation with the Commission on Teacher Credentialing in a very long time, and there's been lots of work happening there as well. We have an opportunity and a request already from our partners at CARS Plus to share updates on their work and have an opportunity to engage. And I would highlight we're focusing on the voice of students and obviously parents and caregivers and family members. And so making sure that we're hearing from our partners on the front lines in terms of CARS Plus, as well as our partners from CTA, if they're interested in presenting. And so those might be 2 additional slots in February as well. And so with that, and community schools, David, not the presenters, I wasn't able to coordinate the invitation for Kristen Wright and Hayne Kimner. And so that was on my list. And so that's a standing agenda item that we wanted to have at this meeting, but I wasn't able to pull that together. So that's also on the list for February. So with that, recognizing we're at around 50% capacity for our February meeting, opening it up for other suggestions. And as you were suggesting topics, if you have a point of contact, it's okay if you don't, but a place to start the outreach of who might provide the presentation would be helpful.
Commissioner Sorter?
Okay, so in terms of rightful presence and inclusion, I had an idea for unified sports. A lot of districts are moving towards that, and it's right before spring when a lot of districts are hosting them, and I do have a contact for that, so somebody can share out what that looked like in a district.
And I believe it may have been a year or 2 ago. It was before San Bernardino City, so the year before, the Gold Award winner, I forget the name of the school, in Orange County, participated in unified sports. And yes, so just wanted to share that. Commissioner Ding?
Just wanted to add to the CARS Plus presentation, got a bit more information. It will be mainly on resources for special educators, like professional development opportunities, as well as I think they're holding their conference in February this year in Irvine on inclusion and for any special educators, resource specialists, etc. And the contact person will most likely be Lana Tejas, and I'm also a student liaison, so communicate through that. Thank you.
Commissioner Tex-Jargle, then Snipes.
I think that we should have a presentation with the Office of Youth of Community Restoration. That's very major in my opinion. And I would like, because since this has been recently passed by Governor Newsom and initiated by him, I think it would be a great idea to have a presentation from them. I don't know who the contact is, but I would love to figure out and get in contact with them and get this moving.
So I see a number of commissioners have contacts, so I'll reach out to either Commissioner Estes or Notch to facilitate that. Thank you. Commissioner Snipes?
I would like to have the California Tribal Families Coalition come. I think I've requested a couple times. I'm really excited about them. I do have a contact, and I will email the contact information to you.
We also have a request, hold on, from a CDE partner about the IEP Facilitation Network model and ADR, who's requested an opportunity to share with us. So I will follow up and get some more information about that presentation, and depending on how it fits in with priorities for the February meeting, we may have a presentation from our partners there or our subsequent meeting in April. And Commissioner Snipes, thank you for bringing back the presentation from the California Tribal Families Coalition. Other suggestions, thoughts?
Chair Tustin?
Yes.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, I guess, I'm trying to anticipate if we're going to do an April visit to the legislature, and if so, maybe in our February meeting, we can have some preparation for that. I know that you said we're going to be getting a rundown on some of the bills that will be pending then. But if there's other aspects of the April visit, which I've never done, that you can help us prepare for, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Absolutely. We will build that into the agenda planning time in February. And I know last year we were planning on going over, and there's always construction in the Capitol, so maybe it'll be done by April, but we will begin. No, I'm seeing some heads now. No, we will begin preparing for that, and I think for many of us it will be a first-time experience or a newer experience. I believe the last time we had a Capitol visit was pre-pandemic, I think, and maybe only Commissioner Topalian and Lopez and myself were here during that time. Ooh,
I think so.
Happened quickly. And again, a moment of not feeling my youthfulness. So any other suggestion items for the February agenda before we transition?
I guess an idea is probably inviting our legislators to come in and talk about some things, talking about some certain bills they have in mind, their different opinions, because, you know, California is very, very diverse, and so we got to get some different people's opinions too, and what are their opinions about the things we're doing, any concerns they have, and kind of talking with them, maybe having special guests come in and talk as well would be great.
Commissioner Michaud?
Process question, not sure if this is the right time to ask, but I would want some time with the goal award committee during committee time in February.
Okay, perfect. So we filled up at least 1.5 agendas for the rest of the year. Thank you everyone for your input. We will begin working on this as soon as possible. For those of you who have made recommendations and have points of contact, please reach out to Vice Chair Groff and myself and potentially make introductions as appropriate, and then we will work with our teammates at CDE to begin putting the agenda together. All right. As we close this item, I just want to scan the dais for any additional thoughts about agenda building or questions. Did you have one? No. Okay. All right, so with that, as we move into the last, before we close this item, I'll ask for this slide for public comment to be displayed. I want to remind commissioners, you have the annual report, physical copies to take with you, and also I would encourage you between now and our February meeting, now that we've shaped our agenda, the next topic for us to logistically figure out is our liaison program and how we ensure like a synergy between meetings. And so until we can have more in-depth conversations, I would ask everyone to maybe identify one topic from this meeting cycle, one or two topics that you can share with a point of contact in your network to highlight the conversations that we're having. I know I will be sharing the rightful presence presentation and I don't know the acronym yet, the CYBHI information broadly in my network, because those are obviously two transformative priorities that I would want to highlight within my network. And so trying to model kind of what the liaison conversations will look like for me as I meet with the SECO group and others in the coming months to share our conversation and then ask for any reflections or priorities in their work that might align. All right, so with that, seeing no public comments in the room, we will close public comments in the room and see if there are any public comments online.
We have one caller waiting. Caller ending in 7407. You will have 2 minutes to make comments. Please state your name for the record, and your 2 minutes begins now. When I unmute you. There we go. Now.
This is Judy McKinley calling. I would like to make a suggestion for an agenda item. Might you determine the needs of the commission in regards to LCFF and LCAP and their level of knowledge, and if it would help to have a presentation summarizing what LCAP is about. My second thing is that as far as mental health goes, in the past, students who do not qualify for Medi-Cal and do not have mental health services through their private insurance have been excluded from receiving those mental health services. If I understood correctly, has that been corrected within the mental health system? Thank you.
Okay, there are no more callers.
Okay, we'll leave the slide on the screen and we'll move into our last agenda item, general public comment. And so members of the public wishing to make any general comments at the conclusion of the meeting, we'd ask you to line up now. And anyone online who would like to make general public comment, we ask you to dial in now. Seeing no public comment in the room, we will close public comment in the room and just hold for 30 seconds for public comment online.
There are no callers.
Okay, we will close public comment online. And as we move into adjournment, Commissioner Ding, Commissioner Tuggs-Jarhold. Thank you so much for your commitment of time. Your presence has already changed the dynamic in the room and validated the importance of hearing from our students, your lived experiences, and appreciating and respecting your perspectives. Thank you so much, and we look forward to continue to learning with you. With that, I will officially adjourn the meeting.